And I will just start to move forward on this. So, as is typical with these, I apologize, there's so much text on this screen, but before we launch in too far in this summit, I did want to go through sort of why we're here, what we're doing, what we hope to accomplish, why we really need all of you to play a role in this. And so when we walk away, we actually have some potential action items, and we can say that this summit was of value. So really the main goal of this summit is to provide a forum. And I've tried to bold the key things so I'm not just reading this to you. But it was originally just going to be a climate services summit that could have run the gamut of sectors from the water supply, infrastructure, agriculture. But because this was a virtual meeting, we wanted to hone in a little bit more on what part of climate and what sector we want to favor. So this one is going to be focusing on agricultural users of climate information, decision makers, but to kind of create a community over all of this with respect to decisions and planning around agriculture. We identified 4 objectives that we hope to accomplish with this summit. The first is to really build increased awareness of what tools and information and resources are out there regarding climate and weather information that can help build improve planning and decision making. We also want to identify where are there needs and gaps. We know that sometimes we can't even get a 3-day forecast right, let alone a climate outlook. So are there certain aspects of climate services, and we'll learn more about what we mean when we say climate services shortly, but are there areas that we should be focusing on? And you'll see also that there's quite a bit of representation at the state and federal levels. So when we collect these needs, that can actually help prioritize future funding so that we can focus on filling these needs and gaps. We want to improve coordination and collaboration, not only among the climate service providers, but also the agricultural community, the advisors, the decision makers, anyone involved, which is why we invited you all to this, is so it's maybe a network can be formed at the end of this, and then identify opportunities to seek out additional resources to meet those identified needs. The anticipated outcome, so I will read this one to you, is Indiana agricultural advisors, planners, and agency program leaders will have a better understanding of who to contact for different climate services needs and information. So that anyone across the state, if you're dealing with agriculture from any aspect and you have a question that is relevant to climate or weather, hopefully by the end of this summit, I can reach out to Beth, because even if she doesn't know the answer, she might know who to refer to. Given that, I want to move on to this summit was really developed with, it was a team effort. It was a village, if you say. So I want to introduce who all was on this planning team. You'll hear from many of them throughout this. They're great resources, and they gave a lot of good input on how we should organize this summit in terms of different sessions, who the presenters should be, what the topic should cover. So I haven't introduced myself. I am Beth Hall. I am the Indiana State climatologist. I work at Purdue University, and so I'm the director of the Indiana State Climate Office and the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. Next, we have Glenn Kerr. He is the executive director of the American Association of State Climatologists and one of the sponsors for this summit. Jennifer Day, who is the regional coordinator for the Great Lakes Coordination Team with NOAA. She works out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Also a sponsor of the program, Dennis Toddy, who is the director of the USDA Midwest Climate Hub. David Smith, who is within the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, the Division of Water. He's a water resources planner. Manuela Johnson with the Indiana Department of Homeland Security, Administrator, State Disaster Relief Fund. Planning team continues. We have Doug Clark, who is our Central Regional Climate Services Director, works with NOAA. He's out of Kansas City, Missouri. Melissa Whitholm of Purdue University's Purdue Climate Change Research Center. She's the operations manager. Hans Schmitz, and yes, that's the picture he gave me to post on this, and always fun to work with. He is an extension specialist out of Posey County in Western Indiana and the Zoo Master Tech Master of this summit. And we have from the National Weather Service Indianapolis office, Sam Lashley, who is our warning coordination meteorologist, and Mike Ryan, who is a climate focal point. So at any time, if you recognized any of those names, because this is such a tight summit, it was originally going to be an in-person summit over 2 days, maybe 2.5 days. Then it became a virtual summit that was going to be over 3 mornings. And then we thought there's no way we're going to get people to tune in for 3 consecutive mornings. Is there any way we can get this down to just 2 mornings? What that means is it is going to be a lot of presentations. We're hoping that we have a lot of time for discussion and questions. But please, as the presentations are going on, if you have any questions, post those in the chat, because I'm sure there's so many people on this planning team that would be happy to answer those questions, particularly as the presenter is still speaking. And if not, when the presentation is done, the presenter can go back to the chat and try and follow up on some of those questions. And we really do want to see a lot of engagement going on. We want to see that the participants who are tuning in do have questions, are seeking out additional information, want to know more. So the general agenda that we have laid out for the 2 days. So today we're going to start talking about what do we mean by climate services. A lot of times when we hear the word climate, we think climate change, and it could be a volatile phrase and using that, but climate services is slightly different. And that's why we wanted to have this summit to talk about climate services so that it's an okay phrase. It's more of an idea of resources. We're going to look at Indiana climate, both what has been happening in terms of trends and extremes, and how the future is looking for that, and how both the past and the future can tie into climate services and what we need for agriculture. Then there'll be some presenters on regional tools and resources, the resources that the USDA offers and state ag programs offer, national resources that are climate related, and finishing off the day talking about water supply and monitoring related to climate services. Then on tomorrow morning, we'll hear some more about climate products and services from the National Weather Service, the Climate Prediction Center. We'll look at what sort of climate monitoring and assessment is going on across the state, different ways that climate is being used by members of the agricultural community, not just producers, but advisors, decision makers. What are the needs and, that still exist and challenges? And then where do we go from here? As the summit wraps up, it would be great if we could have a list of action items, if we could have a sense of community across the state with all of the participants here, but how do we accomplish that? So is Glenn Kerr on?
Sure.
Yes, Glenn, would you like to say a few words? Did you have some slides you wanted to show?
Sure. I'll do that real quick.
All right, then I will stop sharing.
It says sharing is disabled.
Oh, I didn't tell Hans that you were going to
try one more time. You should have access now.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Can you see that?
No.
No, that's not good then. Let me see here. Let me try one more time. Push the share button. That's always the key. Okay. Now you can probably see it, right?
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Try to keep us back on track. So anyway, hi there. As Beth said, I'm Glenn Kerr, and I am the Executive Director of the American Association of State Climatologists. We're located in Asheville, North Carolina, and we're very happy that you're able to attend this Indiana Agricultural and Climate Services Summit. Just a little bit about us. The AASC is a not-for-profit professional association, and we support those who work in the fields of applied and service climatology. And we work to develop the advancement and the delivery of science-based climate data and services that are focused on meeting the needs for decision-grade information to serve the stakeholders and public at the state and local levels. We've got members located throughout the entire United States, as well as Puerto Rico, and they work at federal, regional, and local levels, as well as within private industry. So we're excited to have your state climatologist, Dr. Beth Hall, as one of our newer state climatologists, having moved over from Illinois, where she was director of the Mrcc, and once again, director of the Mrcc with its move to Purdue and Indiana. And you may not know it, she's also been a previous state climatologist in New Hampshire, correct? So she's going to continue to serve as a state climatologist. And I've counted myself lucky to work with her over the last several years and know that the state of Indiana is going to benefit greatly from her expertise and enthusiasm. So as she mentioned, last year she jumped at the chance to partner with AASC and NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information to offer this summit. And we had hoped to have it in Indiana last year, just after the Indianapolis 500, but after a year-long delay due to the pandemic, and with things just opening up, here we are meeting once again online, as everybody's gotten so good at doing. So we're hoping you're able to take advantage of this summit to learn about the climate services available to you through the Indiana State Climate Office and how they can provide climate services to benefit you in your decision making. And we also ask you to help us by informing us about your use cases and the value of climate services and data to you. And please also let us know if you have any epiphanies during this event about climate services or data requirements that may occur to you that we're not actually showing you. And so with that, let me pass the baton back to Beth. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Glenn. At this point, before we get too deep into a climate services summit, I'm going to invite Dennis Toddy to present now to talk to us about what is climate services and why is it relevant to the ag community. Dennis?
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here and glad to be a part of this. And where are the slides?
Looks good.
Okay, thanks. Yes. Okay. Thanks for having me here. I've been involved with these in several states around the Midwest. And I enjoy doing this because of the opportunity that we have to talk about how we can use information, data, tools and these kinds of things to help bring that usefulness for people down to the ground where they can help improve their profitability, reduce their environmental impact, any number of things along those lines. So first off, I'm Dennis Toddy. I'm the director of the USDA Midwest Climate Hub housed out of Ames. I'm going to tell you more about the hub later. You have to listen to me twice in a day, so I apologize for that, but you'll get to hear more about that. And since we're doing things about state climatologists, I used to be a state climatologist for 13 years in the great state of South Dakota. There, you happy now, Glenn and Beth? We made the connection now. So I do approach a lot of things through the lens of being a state climatologist and how we use information down to people's uses. I also do want to say a thank you to Doug Cluck. I don't think Doug is on here. I've shamefully stolen a chunk of this because he's done this talk at some of the other ones, but I've kind of morphed it a little bit into how we deal with things for agriculture. Now, look across the bottom. When we're talking about, Beth talked about partnerships and collaboration, and there is a landscape of folks who work in this arena around the Midwest that include Indiana. Indiana has a great set of folks who can help serve you, but they are also networked with a bunch of federal partners who have been mentioned already. You're going to hear from a lot of these folks today in different contexts about what they do and kind of get an understanding of how they connect to this whole system. But there's a lot of NOAA Weather Service folks represented on the planning team, NOAA folks on the planning team. NIDIS you're going to hear from later, state climatologists, National Drought Mitigation Center. A lot of these folks who are doing things, working together to help provide information. So you're not going it alone. You're working with a network of folks who, and in the Midwest, I think we are all quite happy. We have the ability to work together and create information for people. Okay, let's go a little bit into climate services and regional climate services. Beth introduced this, and she set this up pretty well. that when the word climate is talked about, climate change is one that people automatically reach to. But when we talk about climate services, there's a broader scale that we're talking about here. Climate change is part of talking about climate services, but you can talk about climate services that are basically, right off the bat, climate information services across time and space scales to help people make decisions. How do we take data? How do we take information? Because meteorologists, climatologists, we deal with a lot of data and information and geek out about it because it's really cool and it's a lot of fun. But what makes sense to us doesn't always make sense to the end user, or how it's portrayed doesn't always make sense to the end user quite the same way. So that's where climate services comes about. How do we take some sets of information? How do we take sets of forecasts, outlooks, and repackage them, talk about them in a different way, show them in a different way so that an end user can go, I see, here's what I can do with this. Things like weather service forecasts. Weather service forecasts have a lot of great information. Climate Prediction Center outlets have a lot of great information to them. Sometimes being able to connect that to what's going on in agriculture is not a directly easy. So being able to help do that is part of this. Now, these sets of outlines have been around for a decade. Credit to Eileen Shea, who was early in NOAA in the way of climate services. Development and delivery. How do we create something, and how do we get it to people? We've got to be able to get it to people so people can find it, can understand it, and make sense of it. Products and services. Developing tools. Understanding risk and impacts. Time and spatial scales. How do we get it to the right spatial scale? How do we get it to the right time? Okay, you guys hear this in agriculture all the time. Well, this might work here, but that next county, it's always different over there. It always rains more or rains less over there. So trying to get at that time and spatial scale so people understand that sort of thing. And getting it to decision makers, getting it to people who also can help make a decision from this. And sometimes the decision makers aren't who we think they are. I'm also going to invoke a project called Useful to Usable, U2U, who the project manager is also on the planning team, Melissa Whitholm, but several folks involved were part of that. And one interesting thing we found out, we thought in that project we were trying to reach producers, but we kind of found out that producers are an end goal, but there are decision makers and advisors that reach those producers maybe better than we could. So trying to reach the right people with the right information to make decisions. Okay, some other thoughts about regional climate services. And again, these were Doug and I. Doug did consult me on this one, so we did talk about this a little bit. These things all come into part of this partnering. Understanding relationships and knowledge. Monitoring is a huge part of this. Understanding what's going on and putting it into a context are big parts of this. Monitoring and data. Prediction is also part of this. We can understand what's happened previously, but we also need to look ahead in some time frame. Outreach, education is part of this. Research, which is applied research, well, basic research too, but applied research. How do we make more usable information that we do? And this is where the usable came in, making information usable for people. Networking, which we're doing today. Extremes, which have an outsized impact on a lot of things that we do, understanding those, and then new development. These are all things that are involved in climate services. Okay, after all that theory and all that background, what it boils down to is this simple question. And I want you to start doing this right now and hopefully you have already, but actively start thinking about what data, what information, what tools do you need to make decisions for your, and I was trying to come up, wherever your place in agriculture is, what do you need to know that can help you? And some of that you may have in your head already, but also kind of listen. Hopefully we kind of perk other things in your thinking about, well, hey, that would be cool, but it'd also be cool to have this, and try to help suggest some of those as we come along. And there's going to be a time for conversation later in this of knowing more about what you need, what you'd like to have. This is not a one-off. It's not going to have to all going to come out of here, but this is the start of the process to help understand what you have in Indiana, what additional things you need to come up with in Indiana. Some of those may need to be produced in-house. Some of those may be able to be produced regionally. And, you know, I put on here a couple examples. On the left-hand side, soil moisture. Soil moisture is the ongoing bane of the existence. We know the huge impact that soil moisture has, but trying to understand of reality what's going on and then portray that for people so that they can understand some context is a huge one. I mentioned useful to usable on the right-hand side, a growing degree day tool, and helping people understand where they are on the way of growing degree days for corn and where they're likely to be going throughout the rest of the growing season. Those are examples of things that we know we need to know. We're trying to develop those along the way. Now, there are some of these that exist already on a regional basis that NOAA helps to lead. We partner with them, and we do some through the Midwest Climate Hub. Doug Cluck is going to have a chance to talk today about more of these overall. Probably the premier one we've had is our monthly Outlook webinars, basically assessing what's going on and what the outlook says from NOAA. This is year 10 for them, for the Midwest and Northern Plains, and then another set of those that Doug will talk about later, so you can get some idea of some of the services that are being done already. But then there are other ones that may need to be developed. I mentioned the Growing Degree Day tool. That exists already, and I know Beth or someone will be talking about the Midwest Regional Climate Center and some of those tools that are available, and the useful to usable suite of tools. And here's the link to those at the Midwestern Regional Climate Center, where they also have some other ag tools. One of those is on the lower right-hand side. I talked about soil moisture. Here's soil temperature data of what's happening, and always a good thing to know, but always need to have in more detail. But there are also other types of climate services or climate tools that can be developed. One on the left-hand side is an example that I worked with some folks from the National Drought Mitigation Center and a faculty member from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It's a production decision for apples. The idea originally started around drought, but the idea here was to create, and that wheel, if you can't read it very well, or the months of the year, and decisions that people are making around apple production that are impacted by weather and climate. We've developed these for apple, cranberry, potato, and grapes, I believe. But this has been something very attractive and people are interested in. We kind of know some of these for corn and soybeans, but for specialty crops, it's a bit more detailed and takes a little more time. So, but this is a way of combining information about production decisions and weather and climate issues that can help make that easier for people to understand from a climate, for people who are providing services, and also people who are making those kinds of decisions. So, you know, there's some basic things that just maps to more tools, and then more summarized kinds of tools that can be really useful for people. Another one that is we're moving along with throughout the Midwest because of drift issues is understanding temperature inversions, where there are temperature inversions and the potential for drift happening with chemical application. This is beyond its infancy, but we haven't reached a full capability around the Midwest yet. So there's going to be more coming about that. But these are, again, obviously weather climate influence kinds of things. Okay, I'm going to stop there because we've got a bunch of maps we could show here on of the different providers, but we're not going to go through that at this point. So, you know, to wrap that up, really begin thinking, and you can even start putting this in the chat too, of things that you know, is there such a thing as this out there? Maybe there is, we can point you to it. Maybe there is, maybe it needs to be refined a little bit more, but definitely start thinking about what do we really need to have, and what could we develop? Even if we can't do it right now, it can be put on a list of things we can develop. So this is all, again, about taking weather and climate information, combining it in something useful for people, and helping deliver that to people. So I think that I'll wrap that up there and hand back any time that I have left, or if there's any questions we want to do at this point.
Thanks, Dennis. I think that established it good what climate services is and how that compares to other climate terms. I know I talked to somebody last week who said he always thought climate was about ice ages and ice cores and stuff like that. He never thought climate was really anything else. And so I said, well, there's lots of different subfields within climate, and that's a paleoclimate. We have applied climate. And so, yeah, we're today talking about climate services, really. So
and Beth, to add on to that, from a NOAA standpoint, their definition of climate starts at week 2. Not, National Weather Service does week 1. Then when you get to week 2, it goes to climate. Now, that's a hazy area, but that is an area that needs to be guided. So
right, with climate prediction, when we say what's it going to be like in the year 2050, in the year 2100, that's climate. But so we're looking all the way back into our ice ages and all the way forward. So if you have any questions for Dennis or anyone else that you see is either on today or presenting, please feel free to put it in the chat. At this point, though, I want to break things up with an icebreaker. So make sure you all aren't just multitasking and half listening, which I know is very possible with virtual meetings. I have a huge favor to ask of you. If you have a smartphone or if you have a browser on how you're looking, hopefully you're seeing this webpage up, and at the very top it says go to www.menti.com. So you can do this on the Safari app on your iPhone or whatever browser you use on your smartphone. And then hopefully when you go to that website, it will say, what code do you want to use? So we have the code up at the top. I'm trying to do it myself just to make sure this is not going to work. And then hit submit. And you should start seeing the questions. So type it in. And unfortunately, even though we don't know who's putting this in, so this is all very anonymous, we might call you out to say, oh my gosh, who actually did this? But it's kind of fun to think of the diversity of horrible jobs that we've had in our lives. I see the babysitting. I totally concur with that one, which is why I chose to never have children in my life. I think I babysat 3 times and all of them were horrible experiences. And I thought, I am not meant to have kids. Scooping ice cream. Yeah, people dream of doing that, and that could be really bad. Corn tasseling totally fits in with our agricultural theme. Wow, the person who's just loved their job for 14 years. I'm jealous. I know there's more of you out there. Let's see, we have 59 participants, and so far only 24 have entered. So let's see if we can hear from more of you. And I just read testing cow manure. Yes, that has got to be up there. Waitressing, yep. When I was a waitress, I think that also made me realize I should not be in that field permanently. I think I even managed to spill drinks on the head basketball coach of Michigan State at the time. They were in town playing at Indiana University. I served him drinks and I served it right in his lap. And I thought, really, I think Clem Haskins, or was that Minnesota? Clem Haskins was the name of the coach, but I totally made a mess of things. All right, come on, guys. Like I said, there's, now only 49 people have bailed. They're like, well, I'm not going to be on this summit if I have to play with the Mentimeter. Hanging inside a smokestack on a rope ladder, cleaning it. Wow. That sounds dangerous, if not like just horrible in general. The phone bank center. See, I feel like I'm talking about myself, but I had applied for a job when I was at Indiana University to do that. And in my interview, I was so bad that it was like, they said, I just don't think this job is for you, because I began to apologize to the person saying, oh, I'm sorry. I know money's tight. You shouldn't have to donate. And they're like, I don't think you should take this job. Busboy, seed corn. Wow, this is fun. I feel like I'm getting to know you guys, or at least I'm getting to know this community that we have tuned in today. All right. let's try the next one, if I can figure out how to do that. Which apparently I can't figure out how to do. Oh, let's try this one. For Memorial Day weekend, I mostly stayed home, traveled within the state, traveled outside the state, or traveled outside the country. I was curious if anyone managed to travel outside the country this last weekend. And was it someplace other than Canada? All right, we're already getting more participation with this one, which is great. So a lot of folks chose to stay home. I know we had the Indianapolis 500 in the state, so I think a lot of people from where I'm at headed down to Indianapolis, but maybe others on the call headed up to Indianapolis to watch Castrovenes. I can always slaughter his name, Helio Castrovenes win. Okay, and I think I have one more here, and this is just really get a makeup for who do we have on this summit. So I know many of you wear multiple hats, but if you can sort of say, click on this screen of how do you most identify yourself? I feel like the goal here is to squeeze out the federal employees. So we feel like it's a very state, local oriented one. So state, good numbers there. Local, county. Again, we got 34 participants. I don't know, my participant window says there's 48 of you. It seems like we've capped out at 34 with a lot of these. So looks like we have good representation in terms of we have federal, and the reason for that is a lot of presentations today from NOAA, Weather Service, people that are just working at the USGS, USDA, like Dennis. So I think that's why those numbers are high. And of course, they're always trying to better serve everyone with their taxpayer dollars. State folks are on the line again with your state tax dollars. And then the users on the other end of who are we, whether we're extension, university, private, local, county. All right, so that hopefully got us a little bit woken up, a little bit feeling engaged, feeling like, all right, we're somewhat of a community, even though we can't all see each other. So I'm going to stop sharing that and move on to my next presentation. I can find it, and then I will talk about the climate of Indiana. Let me do a quick time check here. All right, so I assume many of you know climate in Indiana, the basics of summers are warm, winters are cold, springs and falls are all over the place. But I really wanted to present this both in what have the trends been like over the last 125, 28 years, what are the concerns of these variabilities, extremes to agriculture, so we can start thinking about, okay, if these are the issues that we are facing in the agricultural sector, again, think about what sort of climate services would help minimize loss, crop yield loss, would help increase profitability from the agricultural sector. And again, I want to point out, when we're talking agriculture, we're not just limited to vegetation. This could be livestock production as well. So common themes, even though I've just been the state climatologist here in Indiana for a little over 2 years, but have been in the field of climate services for, I think, like 25. In Indiana, we had that cool, wet spring. Remember just a couple years ago in 2019 that it was so cool and wet that it took forever until really into June before the farmers could get into the fields. We are often susceptible to those spring cold snaps where things had warmed up, they had been warm, we planted, we got out, and then all of a sudden a freeze comes through and we have frost injury or freeze injury to the plants. Wind and heat stress. So the picture to the right, I think it was it a year or two ago? It was like August 20th. We had the derecho come through, and obviously there were greater impacts in Iowa, but I think Illinois and even Indiana had some impacts from that derecho, that strong windstorm. Drought, while we're not facing the drought that Western states have, it seems like we are seeing it happen, perhaps more and more, perhaps because of the timing of precipitation in the state. And then that risk of early fall frost. And maybe it's not so much that it's early fall frost, but because our growing season is expanding so much, it's making us more susceptible to those early fall frosts. So I'm going to start off by kind of going season by season. I only have 15 minutes and I probably will go over on that. But I want to review just by season how are the trends that we're seeing climate-wise in Indiana. And then at the end of this talk, I'll talk about where the future projections are taking us. So snowfall, when we think of winter, we think of snowfall. Snow can be good for the soils, for trying to get at that slow amount of moisture seeping into the ground instead of facing runoff. This is a time series going back to 1943 based on data from the Indianapolis airport, where the bars that are orange, that are kind of pointing down, that's the years when the amount of snowfall was below average. And then the blue bars are representing years when it's above average. And you can see that while I could have stuck a mathematical trend line to this, even in our recent years, the snowfall has been below average, but we couldn't sit there and say, so this is where things are heading. It's very likely, but we don't have to go far, just to the 2013-14 winter, I believe, when not only was it a very snowy winter, but it was almost a record-breaking winter with respect to snow. So we do run the risk of having less snowfall because temperatures are warming, but there's still a lot of variability. Another thing I wanted to point out on this slide is when the snowfall seasons, winter seasons, were below normal, they seem to be below normal no more than by 20 inches. But when it's above normal, it seems to be this deluge. And maybe that makes some sense because the snowfall can really happen in big amounts. But we're talking 3 years where it was over 30 inches above normal. And so we'll see that in a lot of the slides that sometimes it's not an even magnitude of being above or below normal or average. Sometimes one side seems to, when it hits, be a lot worse than when it's the flip side. So if we think about precipitation, which is both liquid and snowfall that is melted for the winter, instead of just snowfall, and these are maps looking at December through March, and I included March. Usually we do 3 months, but March still can be kind of that wintry, snowy month. 3 years ago, so starting with the 2017 to 18, 19, 19, 20, the amount of precipitation was significantly above normal. I mean, in some places we're looking at 6 to 9, 6 to 8 inches. But this last year, we're just coming out of a relatively dry year. And I think we saw that even with snowfalls. Yeah, the winters seem like they're getting wetter, not snowier, but wetter. But we can still be susceptible to remarkably dry winters. And this could have an impact by then coming into the growing season with drier soils than we would like. Regarding just looking at precipitation trends, this time series is taken from NOAA's Climate at a Glance tool. And it's interesting because as I go all the way back to 1895, and this is statewide annual totals, there is pretty much a negligible trend for wintertime precipitation. And again, this is all liquid, so it includes even the snowfall that was converted to water. There's in fact a slight negative trend in here, but I would say it's negligible. But look at the variability in the whole situation. In fact, there's a lot of up and down year to year. One year it's very wet, the next year the winter is very dry. And I've heard a couple folks say, wow, it just seems like a roller coaster ride nowadays, because if they grew up and were farming in the 1950s and 1960s, look at how less variable the winter precipitation was. So for them, when they were back in those decades, it was almost reliable. You could almost predict how much precipitation, how much moisture they were going to get over the winter season months. And then it seemed like in recent years, it's not like it's a trend one way or the other. It's this roller coaster ride that can be very difficult to plan for, to plan around. Moving on to temperatures, the maximum temperature for the winters, again, the trend is only 0.1 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. So while it is a slight increase, for me, perception-wise, negligible. Again, note the variability and note the degrees here, the variability. You're seeing temperature 32 on average for a 3-month period, all the way up to 44. So that's like a 12-degree swing that you really could be looking at from one winter to the next. That's the maximum temperature, the highest temperature per day averaged over the 3-month season. If we look at minimum temperatures, so how cold does it get, the trend is slightly increasing now just by 0.2 degrees Fahrenheit per decade, which also seems relatively negligible. But this could also contribute to the lack of snowfall if temperatures are just hovering right around that 32-degree line, as opposed to falling below it. Then when precipitation does come, it's wetter, which can then be more soaking and runoff, as opposed to snowfall that can gradually seep into the soils. There's another climate factor with agriculture, particularly specialty crops, that looks at the accumulation of chilling hours. And this is usually looking at each hour's temperature average. And if that value falls within an ideal range, say 35 degrees Fahrenheit to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and it varies by plant species. The plant, when it's in the dormant season, wants to accumulate these ideal temperature hours, and it tends to correlate to the amount of yield. What we're seeing is a decrease in the number of accumulated chilling hours by season. Again, this data is taken from the Indianapolis airport, so it's not statewide. But what we don't quite know, though we can make assumptions from this, is are the accumulated chilling hours decreasing since the 1950s because the temperatures are much colder than that sweet range of 35 to 45 degrees? Or is it because we're seeing more and more hours that are warmer than that sweet spot, that sweet range? And I would venture to say it's probably because we're seeing more and more hours where the temperature is outside the higher rate threshold of the chilling hours. If we move into spring, so as I mentioned 2 years ago, 2019, it was cool and wet. And this map is showing the total annual 3-month, March, April, May precipitation statewide. And we are seeing a bit of a difference from winter. Remember winter, that trend was pretty much nothing. It was like minus something. And here we're seeing 0.16 inches per decade of an increase. So springs are getting wetter. And again, I want to draw your attention to the interannual, or that year-to-year variability, where it's not like every year is going to be wetter than the previous year. We could go from an extraordinarily wet year to suddenly an anomalously, or what we call an out of normal, very dry year. Now, in recent years, if we just look at the last, I don't know how many this is, 8 years, all of them were above the average, the 1901 to 2000 mean of 11.46 inches. So we are still seeing that most of the recent years are wetter than that average. And this just highlights how we have some periods throughout that historical record that were very up and down roller coaster compared to those middle decades. The date of the first 7-day period where the minimum temperatures are greater than 35. So essentially what I'm looking at here in the spring is when do we kind of have that last hard freeze, that last freeze? When do things stay warm enough, consistently enough, that we can start thinking about planting, whether it's our patio tomatoes or it's planting the fields? What we're looking at here is I wanted to see 7 consecutive days where the average temperature was over 35, because I didn't want to have one strange day fall in there and mess it up. It had to be 7 consecutive days. And what was the first of those 7 consecutive days where the temperature is over 35? Along the y-axis, we have the dates that occurred, and this goes all the way back to 1943. So if we just, the average date was March 30th, that's the solid red line. The dashed line is the trend line, and you can see that back then, if we just do a mathematical trend line through all this, it was a little bit around, say, April 7th. But it's been getting earlier and earlier and earlier, so that as recent as 2019, that date of the first 7-day run where the temperatures are over 35 is now around March 22nd or so. So what's happening is this is expanding our growing season. But again, the dashed line is sort of fictitious. I mean, that's mathematically driven. We still have a lot of interannual variability, so that even in 2019, that date of the first 7-day run was much later than both the average and what the trend line says. But it's saying overall, the trend is getting earlier and earlier. Moving into summer, looking at number of days with precipitation over 1/10 of an inch. And I mean, this is an arbitrary number, but in my mind, 1/10 of an inch is something I remember. It's like, yes, this was a rainy day. It may not have caused flooding, but it was significant. The average number of days that are over 1/10 of an inch, again, looking at data from the Indianapolis airport, because it's more of a central location in the state, is 19 days. So this is, again, a time series where the green bar shows how many days above and beyond 19 days there were that year. And then the brown bars indicate how many days below 19 were there in other years. What we can see is certainly, again, that variability from year to year. We have a clump of 3 years here where there were more wetter days in the summer. Going back to, it looks like 2017, though, it was dry, kind of hit even and a little bit wet. So I don't know if there's a strong conclusion we can see from this of the sky is falling, things are getting bad, but it is something to keep in mind. Also, something I'm not going to show in this talk, but how many dry days are there between these wet days? So are we seeing a longer extended period without rain that could cause stress to the agricultural system before rain finally comes and relieves it? Palmer Drought Severity Index. So this is one of many drought indices out there. This particular index is a function of precipitation, temperature, and soil moisture. So it's a little bit more complex than just looking at did it rain, did it not rain. This drought index also is one that accumulates over time. We say it has memory. So it takes into account what was the value the previous month and gives it some weight. What was the value the month before that? Gives it some weight, not as much weight. So this index has about a 6-month memory to it, but I'm just showing you what the values were for the month of August going back in time. This is a fairly significant map that I think we can talk about in terms of look at the increasing trend. So the Palmer Drought Severity Index has gone up by about 1/5 of a unit per decade. And we can see that by these green bars. And what that means is actually wetter times. When the Palmer Drought Severity Index is below 0, those are dry conditions, perhaps drought conditions. And then when they are green, those are wetter conditions. So when we look at a parameter that includes not just precipitation, but precipitation, temperature, and soil moisture, the state is looking better off with regards to the risk of drought. Stress, heat stress is another factor for agriculture, both livestock and vegetation production. Heat stress looks at essentially how many hot days, excessively hot days are there that maybe will shut down the vegetation growth process or just cause stress to animals that are out there in the fields. I looked at what the total seasonal stress degree days were per year, derived the average. And so the average year for the Indianapolis airport is 156 stress degree days over this period from the early 1970s through 2019. And something I want to note here is, yes, it's up and down, but boy, when it is up, when the stress degree days are well above normal, it is, again, these huge spikes compared to the below. Now, keep in mind that if the average is 156, we can't really go below zero, perhaps, but we do have years where the heat is extraordinary and can cause significant stress. I don't have a trend line on this because really I just want to focus on the variability from year to year, and that when it is a very strong, hot year, it could be extraordinarily so. Finally, moving on to autumn. So autumn, we're thinking, what was the total number of growing degree days that have accumulated? This just basically shows that over the years it has been accumulating, which sort of makes sense. If temperatures have been increasing both maximum and minimum throughout the day, then we would expect that the growing degree days would accumulate. But even looking at this black trend line, there are years that fell well below that. So we still need to keep in mind that this is not something that we can count on year to year, so that this year we should have X number of growing degree days because of the trend. We still are susceptible to rather cold years. And sort of like what I showed in the spring, I did a similar exercise that wanted to look at the date of the first hard freeze. Now, this wasn't insistent on a 7-day running period. It was just looking at what was the date of the first hard freeze defined at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. This was for a climate division that represents the central part of the state. The average date from going back to 1980 is November 3rd, and the dashed line shows that mathematical trend through that period. So going back to 1980 off of the trend, that date of the first hard freeze was near the end of October. Now, based on the trend line, we're about a week and a half into November. So again, this is showing that first hard freeze is happening later, which is extending our growing season. But if we are assuming that we're planting stuff and can't harvest at that time, we could be susceptible to these early first freezes, because there were dates that are occurring here in October 20th. So we still can be surprised. Okay, so in summary for what has been happening, to break it down, Indiana is getting warmer. Now, the next couple of slides come from the Indiana Climate Change Impact Assessment. Melissa Woodholm, part of the planning committee, is still heavily involved with this climate assessment. So you can ask her more questions about it. The top table is looking at what are the temperature trends if we go all the way back to 1895 through 2016, because these tables need to be updated, but it still is perfectly fine. And you see, wow, these are kind of small. Do we need to make a big deal about this? The bottom table then says, what if we start looking at 1960 though? We don't go all the way back to 1895, we start looking at 1960. Now we start seeing that these per decade changes are a little bit more eye-opening, particularly in the winter with the minimum temperature, which could explain our lower chances of snowfall. Summertime, 0.5 degree per decade warmer in the summer. In terms of rainfall, this is the increase in annual rainfall by looking at that full period from 1895 to 2016. All across the state, it's a positive change. So we're looking at increasing amounts over the full year, but the southern and the western parts of the state are going to be receiving a bit more than the northeastern and eastern part of the state. And then the map on the right just translates this to a decadal trend. Extreme precipitation. So this is if you took all the days that had precipitation above zero, and we figured out what was that 99th percentile. Are we seeing changes in that number of days increasing per decade? And you see that they're all positive numbers, and they may not look like very large positive numbers, but again, this period goes all the way back to 1900 through 2016. And if we were to even think 1960 forward, would this map change? I think the takeaway here, though, is kind of around the northern part and the southern part, eastern part, it's relatively significant that our number of days of extreme precipitation per decade have been increasing. In terms now of looking forward in time, Indiana, the models are all saying that Indiana will continue to get warmer. And again, this information and more can be found in the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment Report that you can find online. We're expecting about 5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit of warming by mid-century. That warming is expected in all seasons, and this will lead to a longer growing season and perhaps more frequent and intense extreme heat. So going back to those stress degree days that I showed previously. Some of the seasons will be wetter. Winter, we're expecting about a 16 to 20% increase by mid-century. Spring, about a 13 to 16% increase in precipitation by mid-century. More of it we think will be falling as rain than snow because of that temperature relationship. And this could lead to increased early season soil saturation. Some seasons will be drier. At this point, the models are showing a slight decrease for summer and fall precipitation. There's a little bit more uncertainty with the models, or less certainty in these projections, but that could lead to an increase of water demand from the heat in the growing season, could lead to more irrigation in parts of the state that even this year has not fully replenished the groundwater supply. And then the last couple of slides, I just want to tie all this in together for what does this all mean for agriculture? So we have increased spring rainfall that can lead to more erosion. Warmer soils can increase decomposition. Reduced crop yield can actually lead to decreased biomass input. So what sort of climate services, what sort of climate guidance, information, data would be useful to try and minimize some of these impacts that I'm talking about? The frost-free season, or what I've been calling the growing season throughout the presentation, this is showing that really for the Midwest region, it has expanded by about 9 days. So that's cool and all. I mean, can we think about different crops that we can get in there? What though does that increase risk of freeze? Will that increase risk of these other factors of, okay, but what if the summers are hotter and drier? How will this play a role? Carbon dioxide increases. So we understand now that this very unusual, unprecedented increase in temperatures is due to an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Well, plants love carbon dioxide. They thrive on carbon dioxide. And while we're trying to grow plants for agriculture, there's also weeds that thrive on carbon dioxide. So we may need to rethink some of our weed control and other ways that we approach vegetation when we have increased carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And then finally, we have the invasive species. So if our temperatures are warmer, that might be changing the geographic boundaries of where pests can start to come into the Indiana region. But perhaps more concerning to me and maybe other entomologists are, historically, when they invaded the season, the winter was cold enough to kill them off. Now, if the winters are not getting cold enough, these pests can overwinter, which will then exacerbate their population. So whereas before these pests for agriculture might have been annoying, but their populations could stay under control, if these can overwinter because of warmer temperatures, then the pests could be too difficult for us to control. So I'm going to close it there. Like I said, I'm sure I'm well over my time, but I thought it was important to talk about this and what Dennis's talk was to get us all thinking about what is the climate like in this state, but then more so what climate resources are needed. Do we have the information, the real-time monitoring, or the forecasts, or even the climate outlooks to minimize some of the impacts? And some impacts from these changes are going to be positive. So I don't want to make it seem like this is all bad news and this is all negative and that we really need to fight the disaster upon us. I want to respect the fact that there are some definite benefits to these warming climates and to precipitation, but there's also going to be some negative sides to this. And how can we get ahead of that and still have our profits maximized? So I'm going to end that. I don't know if there are any questions. Moderators on this, are there any questions that I should be addressing before I move on to the next presentation? Because you guys get me back to back.
I didn't see anything in the chat that needed to stop and discuss right now, Beth.
Okay, thanks. All right. 9:36. Let me just try and get that going. All right. So now I'm going to talk briefly about what the State Climate Office is. A lot of people aren't aware that there are state climatologists or even what a state climate office does. So I wanted to give a brief overview of that and some of the services we provide. So you heard from Glenn Kerr at the beginning of this summit, give an overview from the American Association of State Climatologists. I think almost every state now or has a state climatologist or is close to identifying one. But in general, this is how I would describe what is a state climatologist. This really should be a leader across the state in terms of not just weather, but climate history of the state. So we don't really deal with forecasts. Rarely do we deal with climate change issues or impacts or adaptation strategies. It's very historically what's going on, what are the trends? We have good data going back to 1895. Are there seasonal characteristics that go a little bit deeper than just winters are cold and summers are warm? The state climatologist really should be that leader of data networks out there. This is a map that's actually zoomed in fairly well to the Indianapolis area. And whether you can read all the names or not isn't important. I wanted to really impact just how many names there are. And then if you look at the legend on the left of this map, it's showing all the different networks that is possibly being displayed on here, from airport weather stations to volunteer precipitation networks to automated networks. And so when people say, oh, I'll just grab data from my closest station, maybe there's some issues with that data network. So your state climatologist really should know the ins and outs of all of these networks, know which ones have good quality control going on, which ones are hourly data versus daily data, which of these networks have wind speed and humidity data versus just temperature and precipitation. So really, if you ever have questions about, well, where should I get the best data and I'm looking for wind speed and direction, this is where a state climatologist would come in. State climatologists are still scientists. A lot of us have advanced degrees and got those advanced degrees not because we were able to distinguish data networks one from the other, but because we were able to apply historical climate data to something else. This picture is just showing a schematic of how climate can play a role in replacing stormwater infrastructure. If we know that precipitation is increasing and our stormwater infrastructure system is getting outdated, well, how much bigger should that infrastructure system be? Obviously, with this summit, it's going to be a big deal with agriculture. So if there are spraying issues, whether it's with respect to wind speed and direction, or if it's with respect to, is there low-level inversion going on, then the state climatologist could actually study the data with these different circumstances and even tie it with crop yield to see, well, how does climate impact crop yield so that we can even know what sort of questions we should be asking. And then finally, in terms of just groundwater supply, climatologist typically is not a water resource manager. That's usually USGS, but because precipitation plays a role in that, there could be a lot of interagency partner collaborations that go on between a state climatologist and those in other fields. And then finally, really, a state climatologist is that public servant. They all across the US are funded a little bit differently. Some are funded by the state and are worked out of state government offices. A lot of them are university employees, but they all really should be serving the needs of the residents of that state by trying to provide information that will make the state safer, more profitable, more desirable for tourism and recreation. It needs to be someone who is constantly going around asking, what can I do for you? How can I give you information? And then also a communicator. So comfortable in talking to a broad range of audiences to convey the information, to maybe take the mystery and the math out of it so that it is more useful and usable information. So when I came on board at the State Climate Office in 2019, I developed this vision for the Indiana State Climate Office. I wanted it to be a recognized center of climate services, but also a leader of applied climate science. I wanted people to approach the State Climate Office not as a library of climate data, they certainly could, but as someone to go to and say, hey, we're working on a proposal, or we're trying to decide what type of farm we want to invest in and so forth. Some way where we're consulted even on the knowledge that can be applied elsewhere. I have two goals for the State Climate Office. One is to increase the visibility of the office across the state and region, hence this summit and several other workshops that the State Climate Office leads, but also to increase the reputation of the State Climate Office as a leading applied science program, not just within the state, but regionally and nationally. I want Indiana to be on the map, so to say, at the regional, national level of where to go to for this. When we hear national and federal reports of climate situation, it would be great if we heard Indiana being mentioned on national news for their expertise. We do have a website. I have the website URL up here. I know it's probably too much to take down, so if someone on here wants to put that in the website so folks can copy and paste it elsewhere, that's great. Just going along the top, you can learn more about us. You can have a way to access data. There's maps from this website. Under climate maps, you can look at 7-day, 30-day, 90-day conditions of things like temperature, precipitation. You can look at growing season lengths. You can look at the average date of the first freeze or the first hard freeze, the average date of the last hard freeze. For data, a whole bunch of those different data networks if you know what you want, but if you really aren't quite sure, you can always click on the data request link at the bottom. So this is under data at the top banner, and that will shoot us an email saying, hey, I'm looking for hourly temperature data that's closest to Muncie, Indiana for 1991 and 92. And then we can do the work in a sense and provide it for you. I'll have a presentation tomorrow going more into the Mesonet, the Purdue Mesonet. And a Mesonet is really just a collection of weather observing sites, automated weather observing sites. And so the Purdue Mesonet comprises 9 locations. Data from that Mesonet can be accessed through our website. You can also go to a dashboard where, depending upon the location, so this is near Bedford, Indiana, you can see just on a very quick snapshot what was the precipitation and temperature in the past 24 hours, 7 days, 30 days. You can dive deeper, look at time series. You can customize the period you want to look at the time series. You can also download the raw data. We also have thematic locations or thematic pages on our website. A lot of these, though, at this point are pointing to products from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center, which I'll talk to you more about later today. But you can see we have themes of agriculture, drought, winter, Great Lakes, so that can take you to tools there. And I'm going to end it at that point because I know you're probably tired of hearing me talk. And where we might be really close to on time. So I'm going to stop sharing. Planning team, moderators, anything that we need to add? Any questions that have come up?
Hi, Beth. This is Melissa. I just want to encourage people to put their intros in the chat. I'm collecting those, and I'll share a list of those here at the first break and throughout the morning and tomorrow as well. Same thing goes with useful URLs to the data that are being shared or the websites that are being shared. I'm collecting those, and if others have their favorites, I'll pull those out of the chat throughout the day, so please use those too.
Yep, and hopefully I'm sharing again the opening welcome slide that gives instructions for how you can modify your name in the participant list as well if you want to add in where you're with, who you're working with. So I think at this point, if I'm following the agenda close enough, we are due for a break. I know my throat is because I've been talking a lot. So if it's okay, why don't we take a quick break? You guys can check emails, do whatever you need to do, and then let's reconvene at 10 o'clock. And at that point, we're going to hear from me again about the Midwestern Regional Climate Center and the Drought Mitigation Center and ag stuff. So again, I appreciate you all being here. Have a break, and I'll see you at 10 o'clock Eastern. The question is, and boy, I thought I fixed that typo, what are the 2 greatest climate threats to agriculture in Indiana? And I think hopefully you have the ability to just type those in. So far we have flood and drought, heat, and I've designed this one as a word cloud. So the more people that enter a word, the bigger that word is. Invasive species. Those cicadas. Reluctant adapters. Huh. Runoff.
Do you have the right answers, Beth?
We'll grade
You're all
everything.
wrong.
You're all wrong. Now I'm going to give you the correct answers. Yeah, the challenge to this is if we can identify what the greatest climate threats are to agriculture, do we have the best resources to get ahead of these, to prepare for these, to minimize the impact? So I have a method to my madness here. And yes, there's only 3 incorrect answers that I see so far. I'm just kidding. So again, for those just coming back after hopefully a good break where you got to get some stuff done, I have a Mentimeter up on the screen, encouraging you all to go to that site, put in the code, and I'm interested in hearing from all of you. I'm only up to 20 participants at this point, but I realize we're just coming back from the break. Apologize for the grammar there, what are the 2 greatest climate threats to agriculture in Indiana, in your mind? And again, this could be including chickens, poultry, it could be cows, it could be specialty crops, row crops, things that you see are going to compromise the profitability of the production. At this point, the biggest words, and the size of the word is indicative of how many people entered that word. The biggest words are drought, flood, invasive species. If you disagree with that, then people need to put in other words to try and compete to make them bigger than drought and flood. Freezing is getting bigger. Heat is getting bigger. We're up to 26 participants. So as you're thinking about these threats, I want you to be thinking about, okay, so drought is a threat to agriculture in Indiana. Are there any sort of climate services, climate data, climate resources, or tools that could help prepare for drought or flood or for invasive species? Some sort of, would it be a monitoring tool? Would it be like an alert tool that would say, give you the heads up of, hey, based on current atmospheric and soil conditions, we're expecting the brood 10 cicada to take over everything. Think about where we are lacking. You might sit there and go, well, as I'm looking at these move around, inconsistency, that is the biggest climate threat, is that variability that I kept talking about. Okay, so what could we do? What data is out there? And maybe you don't know what you don't know, but in a perfect world, in a wish list world, what information do you think if you could make better decisions and get ahead of these threats? Underinvestment, disease pressure, nutrients, people. What can we do about people? Thinking of a Soylent Green thing here, but if you don't know Soylent Green, then don't look it up. Reactive responses. All right, we're at 30. I want to keep it going, but all of these answers, the word cloud, as people continue, if you want to continue to put this in, I will have to go off of this screen, but if you have it up on your smartphone, would love to hear your information, because we could put this in a report. We could put this as a prioritization in a sense of, this is what people who attended the Climate Services Agriculture Summit are saying are the biggest concerns, the biggest threats to agriculture. How do we then address these threats? So I'm going to stop sharing that and do my next presentation, which I think is my last one for today, but you'll hear me again tomorrow. Okay, so prior to the break, I was talking about the Indiana State Climate Office and what a state climatologist is and does, and why you would go there, perhaps, instead of maybe going to the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. There are 6 regional climate centers across the U.S. Currently, the Midwestern Regional Climate Center is located at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, but it will be moving to Purdue, and I'll talk about that more at the end of the presentation. The mission of the MRCC, and I would venture to say this is true for most regional climate centers, is to provide high-quality climate data, derived information, and data summaries for the whole region, monitor and assess regional climate conditions and their impacts. The Midwestern Regional Climate Center was affiliated with preparing specialized historical climate data sets, such as data that was collected, believe it or not, by the medical personnel at Civil War forts back in the mid-1800s. And so we still have those handwritten records that we have digitalized to see if we can even go back further than just 1895, and then coordinate and conduct applied research on climate-related issues and problems. So you're probably looking at this going, wow, so it sounds like a regional climate center is a lot like a state climate office. And while that is true, there is a lot of overlap. I will say that in my mind, I have your bonuses, outreach, and education. I think a state climatologist obviously focuses more on the state as opposed to the full region. And they tend to do more communicating and engagements across the state with the actual residents of the state, with key partners, with stakeholders within the state. Whereas the MRCC tends to focus more on data delivery, and tool development, because a lot of state climate offices don't have the personnel capacity to build a lot of these tools. So there's a strong partnership between state climate offices and regional climate centers, because the regional climate centers have really good access to the data, and then the state climate offices through their websites can point to those resources or can pull that data from a regional climate center. But there's a lot of other climate centers, programs, entities out there. So I wanted to use this slide to highlight what makes them different. For example, we heard early on in the summit from Dennis Toddy, who's the director of the USDA Climate Hub. Well, what makes his Climate Hub different than a regional climate center? Not in this summit, but future other climate summits, you might hear from NOAA's Sea Grant program that has a climate component. There, like I said, there's just a whole bunch of climate entities out there. There's a Climate Adaptation Science Center. And how is that center different than a regional climate center? Well, regional climate centers of all of those work the most directly with the raw data. They're the ones that are pulling the observational data from these weather stations, storing that data into databases, accessing, organizing, developing decision support tools, making that data value added, making it so it's actually sending information as opposed to numbers to the end user. And they are not particular to any sector or stakeholder. So that's pretty important. I mean, really, a regional climate center is a data warehouse. They do applied climate research. They do a lot of communication, like a state climate office. But at the end of the day, they're looking at a regional scale as opposed to one state. And they have the capacity to build more of these decision support tools. The other climate programs that are out there tend to be more sector specific and focusing on climate impacts. So for example, the USDA climate hubs tend to focus on agriculture because it's funded through the US Department of Agriculture. They also might be thinking and focusing more on how we can adapt agricultural practices for climate change. What are some adaptation, mitigation? How should we better prepare agriculture in this country for that? So it tends to be a little bit more climate change focused, more preparatory in nature. There's a lot of social science analysis that can impact plans and policies. They could be giving recommendations of, well, if we do anticipate this much of a temperature increase, these are the impacts we have, and so we should be making these considerations. Tend to be a bit more agency focused. So I mentioned the USDA Climate Hub, the USGS's and Department of Interior's Climate Adaptation Science Center. NOAA has their Sea Grant program. They also have what they call RISAs, Regional Integrated Science and Adaptation programs. And they tend to be, again, more future planning, where regional climate centers are focusing predominantly on historical observations. So the actual data that has been observed, how can we monitor that? How can we correlate what we have seen with what has happened so that if we think those conditions are going to change, we can base our science and our knowledge on what we saw happen in the past with what we expect to happen in the future, but also with monitoring from that data. Okay, so the Midwestern Regional Climate Center, most of its bread and butter is found through its website. And it doesn't look like I have the website on here. So somebody, if you can put in the chat, it's just mrcc.illinois.edu. The most basic maps and products that you can find on there are temperature and precipitation maps, precipitation even including snowfall, and temperature even including growing degree day. You can see in this example, you can look at what it was yesterday. You can look at it going back 7 days. You can look at derived maps. So the first map was just showing what was the maximum temperature. The map on the right says, okay, but how does that temperature compare to average? Let's put this into climatological perspective. And we can also look at very high detailed snowfall data. So again, it's not just limited to temperature and rainfall. We also have products, when I say we, because I was with the Mrcc, now have the Mrcc, so apologize for the pronoun confusion there, have precipitation data that incorporates information gathered from remotely sensed products as well that can give you very fine detail. So that was a lot of maps. You can also, while you can download raw data, like I said, if you want to get what was the temperature data for every single day for the last 30 years, you can certainly pull that. But a lot of times when people are pulling the raw data, it's because they're actually trying to answer another question. Like, well, was this last May the hottest May on record? How did it rank for the state? So here's an example where you can just run that analysis. The code is already written on the website. You can go in and say, I want to see a ranking of monthly precipitation, of seasonal precipitation. You can look at thresholds, such as, boy, this was a hot 3 days. We had 3 days in a row in June where the temperature got over 90 degrees. How often does that happen? So there are tools through the Midwestern Regional Climate Center's website where you can say, I want you to tell me how many times we had 3 or more consecutive days with the temperature over, and you can modify those parameters a whole bunch of different ways. There's application products. So there's a whole suite of degree day tools. So I've talked about growing degree days, pretty critical for agriculture. But let's say you don't want to do your classic start date of April 15th and a base temperature of 50. Maybe you want to tweak different parameters in there. You certainly can. You can look at departures to see, well, okay, if we're at 800 growing degree days on this date, how does that compare to normal? And then other things such as what was the date of the first freeze on average? You can also look at it for a specific year. So there's a lot of different tools that are related to frost, both spring and fall. Speaking of that, there's a whole other section within the MRCC's website, the Vegetation Impact Program. The main part of that was focused on frost freeze products, mostly for the National Weather Service, to try and determine and coordinate with other offices, when should we start issuing freeze alerts? So this map is showing what is the date of the most recent 32-degree freeze. And obviously this is several years ago now, but if you knew that the last 32-degree freeze was 4 weeks ago, then the chances are pretty good that you probably aren't going to see another one. It can give you that indication of risk. Maybe you want to see, well, how many, let's see, the accumulated growing degree days since the most recent 32-degree freeze, maybe since the last hard freeze. So again, instead of just looking at a particular calendar date, you can do it since maybe a hard freeze reset everything. This map is an example showing the lowest minimum temperature for a particular period. So this could be relevant to, like if we had extraordinarily cold temperatures in January and you are a grape grower, you can almost withstand freezing temperatures and freezing temperatures for the part of the plant that's above ground. But if the temperatures got so cold that it damaged the rootstock, and you know what those cold temperatures are, you could go back to this map and see, gosh, how cold did it get this last summer? And am I at risk with my specialty crops of having damage to my rootstock? They also have this accumulated winter season severity index, or the Aussie tool. This is a fun tool that can compare what the current winter season is like to historical data. And it's a combination of, I think, temperature and snowfall. And then it standardizes it across time and space so that we can see, well, was this a rather mild winter for Indiana, or was this a pretty harsh, extreme winter? The MRCC, because it is with the Great Lakes, does binational tools as well. So this is an example of a binational precipitation product where the US has precipitation data that they model and produce, and Canada has precipitation data that they model and produce. But you can see that most of the Great Lakes, if not all the Great Lakes, are actually shared between the two countries. And so there's a water resource management issue going on, and both countries kind of want to know, well, wait a minute, what's falling for both of our countries so that we know what we should be anticipating in terms of water accountability. So it's nice that you have this product that can combine and work on an international level to see what is the rain that's falling and where did it fall, to know what we should be anticipating in terms of water supply. I think Dennis showed a similar map to this of the regional Mesonet program. Again, a Mesonet is just a collection of automated weather observing stations. And a lot of states have their own statewide Mesonet. I had mentioned in one of my talks that Purdue has a statewide Mesonet as well. So there are several products that the MRCC promotes on the website. This is showing what the potential evapotranspiration is over a 24-hour period based on data from both Mesonet and another net called the Ross network, or the SCAN network. But it also has 2-inch temperature data, 4-inch temperature data. I think the map he showed did not have any sites from Indiana, but we will be adding the Indiana Mesonet soil temperature data to that map fairly soon. So it's obviously a little late for the spring planting, but hopefully by fall planting, for those of you that are very concerned in monitoring soil temperatures, this could be a resource for you. Dennis also mentioned the useful to usable suite of products. This is just one of them. I think there's 4 or 5 tools that the useful to usable program created. This looks at growing degree days, and you can see at the top where the user has a lot of parameters that they can modify. And from what inputs they put in, the chart will show where different stages of the growth will be. It will also let them know about the risk of having the growth or be stuck in harvest, if you will, when there were historical freezes. So the blue lines show over all the years when a freeze event occurred, and obviously they want to have it go fully through harvest before that time. So it's a good product to look at. And then the final one here is just freeze probabilities. It's kind of a complicated map to think about, but essentially if you know that your particular plant is susceptible to temperatures below 28 degrees, and you're trying to decide, so what time of year is it safe for me to get out there where my risk is low? Let's say for you, a 20% chance of having a really cold freeze event is okay. You're willing to take a 20% risk. Then you would look at 20% and go up to your favorite temperature, say 28 degrees, and it would say, okay, well then it looks like you could be safe anytime after whatever that is, April 30th, if I interpolated. So that's just a brief overview of products from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. As has been mentioned, it is a bidded center every 5 years. So a new entity can say, hey, we now want to run the Mrcc. This 5-year was up, Purdue University bid on it and they won. So the Mrcc will be moving from University of Illinois to Purdue University. There is a 90-day transition because the center is considered an operational service center. So you can't just shut things down, wait 90 days and hope it comes up at the next place. So from June through August, there will be a transition taking place. Certainly, if you still go to mrcc.illinois.edu, we anticipate that that will be up and active for at least the month of June and hopefully into July. And then by sometime in July into August, start bookmarking it to be mrcc.purdue.edu. We do not anticipate major changes to the website at this point, mostly because we understand that people who go to that site are already comfortable with where to find things, and we didn't want to have a huge upheaval in addition to the transition. So what you see on the Illinois homepage and all the subpages, we hope to retain as much of that as we can. And I think that that is, yes, my last slide for that. So I will stop there and I will check out the chat in case there are any questions. And in the meantime, hand it over to Kelly Smith, where she can talk about tools and resources through the National Drought Mitigation Center.
Okay, I'm assuming you're seeing my slideshow now.
Looks great.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Beth. I'm here to tell you about drought planning resources through the National Drought Mitigation Center. We are based at the University of Nebraska. One of the first things to know as an overview of the center is that we're not just climatologists, which would be a logical thing to think if you looked at some of our most prominent products, which tend to be maps of where drought is. We actually also have a lot of social scientists and people who do other kind of integrative disciplines. I took our biographies from our Who We Are section of the website and did a word cloud, and geography actually emerged as the top term. And as you may know, geography is a very integrative discipline having to do, obviously, with where things occur in space. And then we do have a core expertise of climatology and meteorology, but about half of the staff actually has a background in humanities or social science. We have a few of us are trained in history, and one of the best known parts of our website is actually an account of the Dust Bowl. It seems that every year lots and lots of school children find that very interesting. And then we have people trained as rural sociologists, economists, anthropologists. My own background is in journalism. I started my working life as a newspaper reporter, then added community and regional planning to that, and then also more recently, doctoral work in human dimensions of natural resources, looking at how we can measure and quantify drought impacts. So we're a diverse crowd at the Drought Center. We also have people who do IT and GIS and a lot of outreach and education also, because that's a lot of what we do, is kind of teaching people how to talk about and plan for drought. We were founded in 1995 at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln to reduce vulnerability to drought. So our mission is actually larger than drought monitoring. The US Drought Monitor was created in 1999. It kind of took on a life of its own. It's become very well known. The Drought Center is the academic home of the U.S. Drought Monitor, the academic partner and the web home of the U.S. Drought Monitor, which is produced in partnership with federal agencies. Our director, Mark Swoboda, who is one of the founding authors of the Drought Monitor, though, says that monitoring is the easy part, and it's knowing what you're going to do about it that's the hard part. And that's where the social science and the planning comes in. Much broader set of filters than just climatology and meteorology, just broader than just detecting drought. So you can find all of this information from our website on a normal day. However, our website has been down for a few weeks. I won't say much, except this is a strange era of cybercrime. And we expect our website to be back up any day now. Meanwhile, once it is back up, you can find lots of good information at drought.unl.edu. Our website has been likened to an online textbook for drought planning, and some people consider that to be a compliment and some don't. But one way or the other, there is a great deal of information there, and we are working to make it as personable and accessible as possible so that it doesn't seem dry. One of the most recent additions is a whole website devoted to, a section of the website, pretty extensive, devoted to scenario-based planning exercises. And this kind of comes down to, if you're going to get a group of people to brainstorm about drought or to learn about drought, how can we make that fun? Fun for them, but also productive for the organizers. So people are engaged and the time is going by quickly and you're sharing experiences. Maybe some scenarios have kind of a competitive flair to them. Others are much more cut and dried. What were you experiencing at this point in time when this happened? So there's a whole guide for designing processes to get people thinking about drought and drought planning and drought impacts. We also have a website I'll show you more about. This is just a preview now, related to how we can detect drought impacts, including crowdsourcing drought impacts through a mobile app or a browser. The Drought Risk Atlas is based on high quality, continuous climate data from about 4,000 stations across the country, and it's pre-computed drought indices that will let you slice and dice the data in a lot of different ways for down to a specific location, and it'll help you find the climate station that's closest to your location. And then we have very active communication and outreach, including on Twitter. We've started doing not just tweeting about the Drought Monitor every Thursday. That's been going on for years now, but we're also doing these kind of packaged products now, a hot topic most Thursdays, focusing on a subject of interest. So one of the main things you'll find when you go to the Drought Center's website is a collection of drought monitoring tools. I'll say a little bit more about the U.S. Drought Monitor in a minute, but that is, of course, kind of a primary tool that's emulated by countries around the world. One of the things we do with the Drought Monitor every week is superimpose the different levels of drought on maps that are based on the National Agricultural Statistics Service Census of Ag, that tell us, okay, what are the cattle areas in drought? What are the corn areas in drought? So seeing how each major commodity is affected by drought. And those are actually pretty interesting and informative maps. It generates a really long PDF every week, showing how different commodities are affected by drought, and also comparing it, the proportion of different states. There's some statistics associated with each of those maps too. So before I completely leave the topic of the Drought Monitor, it's not just maps. Personally, I'm a big fan of the time series, the timeline that you see at the left. This is the percent area of Indiana in drought over the years through about March, and it looks like the proportion has been declining. I did not update my slides today. The proportion has been declining since earlier this year, or it declined from earlier this year to March. In addition to a time series, there's things like the image on the right. The comparison slider lets you do a really detailed comparison of where drought is and isn't from one week to another, and you can choose which 2 weeks you're comparing. You can download tabular data. Like if you wanted to see, for example, the numbers behind these, this time series, you could download that. You can download shape files and a lot more interesting data products. So if for example, making a presentation and you just need to grab a certain kind of map or a time series, it's well worth checking out what's available on the Drought Monitor website. And the Drought Monitor website is up right now. That's droughtmonitor.unl.edu. It's a little bit limited functionality, but it's mostly working right now. Our website also has products based on remotely sensed data. The Vegetation Drought Response Index looks at remotely sensed variables, land use, and in situ observations to pick out the drought signal in what it's seeing and telling you how much of dry vegetation is because of drought rather than other factors. And the Quick Dry, or the Quick Drought Response Index, is the same concept, but they work on a much faster time scale. So detecting emerging drought or flash drought on a scale of about 4 weeks, I believe. It says over a few days or a few weeks time. Things can really, especially with flash droughts brought on by heat, things can dry out very quickly. And the Drought Monitor is maybe a little bit like steering a battleship, a little slower to move. The Drought Monitor and a lot of the other products that go into it, sorry. GRACE, the NASA GRACE satellite mission detects soil moisture at something like 2 centimeters, the root zone, and then down to groundwater. So every week there are 3 maps produced based on GRACE data. And they also now are doing forecasts. And I believe that's all being done globally now. Some of the maps are global now. So that's a really interesting product. They label it as experimental, but I think as more people begin to make use of it and kind of calibrate what they're seeing on the ground to what the maps are showing, that will become a really interesting tool. So the Drought Risk Atlas, this is just an example of what you might pull out of it. I randomly chose the Kokomo station. So it lets you choose a station. The points at left are what it looks like if you say you want to see all the climate stations in Indiana. I randomly clicked on Kokomo, and then I chose to see a 6-month time step SPI from 1950 to 2017, aggregated by month. It kind of looks as though the 1960s, by that metric, the 1960s may have been a drier time in Indiana, or at least in Kokomo. And so this is based on one station, and this is the SPI, a 6-month SPI, but there are lots of different indices, and you can have the SPI pre-computed at any different time step. And this is the heat map display of that as opposed to a time series. So there are lots and lots of choices available in the Drought Risk Atlas. And then finally, if you would like to look at a broader universe of monitoring tools, our website includes a link to the Handbook of Drought Indicators and Indices. This actually resides on a World Meteorological Organization website, or one of the UN websites, I believe. It's an interactive database that lets you pick and choose based on different characteristics what type of drought indicator might work best for your particular circumstances. And I joke that this is everything you always wanted to know about 50 of your favorite drought indicators, but we're afraid to ask. It's pretty, it's actually a really good systematic look and comparison of many different drought indicators that are in use around the world. But as I said earlier, monitoring drought is only part of the picture. Drought planning is really important. Once you know how you're going to detect drought, what do you do about it? So the Drought Center focuses on planning really at all different spatial scales. We started out with the 10-step drought planning process that Don Wilhite devised. That was based on a study of states back in the 1980s. And his 10-step process has since been updated for use in countries around the world. It's been modified for different basin, tribal communities have used it. And we've also downscaled it to a community level, drought-ready communities. And even there's a separate guide called Managing Drought Risk on the Ranch. And that's actually been recently updated with a really interesting dashboard for ranchers. And that's worth checking out also. The Drought Center has collaborated with the American Planning Association on best practices for urban planners, looking at how drought planning can be incorporated into different kinds of planning, especially hazard planning. That's kind of a natural, and it's been in, I guess, more recent years that hazard planners have kind of woken up to the idea that drought is a hazard too. The Drought Center maintains a collection of state plans. We have a few sub-state and other scales, but primarily state plans, just because that's an easy enough level to track, or a doable level to track. It's not just drought plans anymore. It used to just be drought plans. Now it is definitely also hazard plans. A lot of water plans do a good job of addressing drought, and many states are starting to have climate plans as well. So if you, once our website's back up, you can go and get to our collection of plans through this interface. And it also, if you click on a state, it will give you some more links for that state, like the Indiana State Climatologist Office, for example, and other important resources and links for that particular state. The guide to scenario-based drought planning, as I mentioned before, it's recent and it's very visually appealing. It's a great starting place if you are planning an activity around drought, either something sort of structured like a game or more of a learning opportunity. It will get people to interact one way or the other. So you can be thinking about what qualities of interaction you're looking for, whether you want to wake up people's competitive juices or if you just want a more sedate discussion, and different things may be appropriate for different circumstances. So the Drought Impacts Toolkit is a platform where we're sort of assembling different layers of data that can tell us about drought impacts. Condition monitoring observations include our own Seymour reports and CocoRa's reports, the existing Drought Impact Reporter, and the Visual Drought Atlas. The Visual Drought Atlas is something we inherited from CocoRa's and Skip. It used to be known as Field Photos, and we're still actively adding to that collection and displaying the photos. If you would like people to submit reports about how they are seeing drought, direct them to go.unl.edu/Seymour and leave off the second part of that URL, and it will actually work because that goes directly to an Esri site. Go.unl.edu/Seymour will take you to the observation form where people can, it's a chance to put your dot on the map. You tell us how wet or dry it is. This is the same 7-point scale devised by CocoRa's, and it gets mapped. Everything appears on that scale on the overview level, on the overview map, and then we map things by sector. And here I'm showing the 2020 map because when I did this, when I first put this presentation together in March, there weren't a lot of observations yet. And the maps are time sensitive, so it lets you look at divide reports by a particular interval of time. If you go to this landing page, when this is back up, Seymour_drought, you can submit a report. In other words, you can get to the survey form or the observation form. You can view the maps of 2021 reports, an archive of past year reports. You can download a fact sheet about the project and how to get started. There's also a how-to video. And there are some social media resources like the one below that will help you recruit. If, for example, Indiana were going into drought and somebody wanted to tweet out an invitation to submit a Seymour report, you could grab one of the images that are already constructed from our social media library. And one of the questions that comes up most frequently related to Seymour reporting is there an app for that? Can you do it with an app? Yes, you can. So if you want to get started using the app, first go to the App Store and download the Survey 123 app. And you can tell it that you want to continue without signing in. And you navigate, once you've downloaded the app, you navigate to either this URL, go.unl.edu/Seymour, or you can use the QR code to get there. So then it will take you to that survey within that app. You continue without signing in. The first time you're setting up the app, you tell it to allow your location while using the app, and then it will prompt you to download the survey. And it actually works pretty well if you enable the location. And then you can go and find your dot on the map. The green one is observations that I go make periodically. There's a nice bike ride I take from my house, and I go and take pictures of these bison that are at a kind of a nature preserve about 5 miles from my house with some really good hills in between. So it gets me outside and gets me observing the bison. I'm trying to submit consistently over time, which is our recommendation for how this works. Don't just tell us when you're having a crisis, when it's dry. We'd like to see the record over time, and that helps us understand the context of any condition reports much more effectively. And this is the request that we get from the Drought Monitor authors too. They prefer, ideally, they'd like to see 30 years of data, but barring that, even just consistent reporting over time is a good start for having the reports be taken seriously when there's a drought and people want to draw attention to a certain area. Our communications products come out at all different scales at regular intervals. We have a quarterly newsletter. We have a monthly electronic newsletter that goes out for drought planners, kind of geared to different state planners who are involved in preparing for drought. And then we have a monthly drought and impact summary, where we're summarizing what happened with drought during the month and what the main drought impacts were. And we've recently switched to a nice visually appealing story map format for that. Then we have an active Twitter presence, so daily or for sure weekly, and then as needed after that, I guess you'd say is the frequency on that. So I feel like the regular signal is an important part of monitoring and an important part of drought preparedness. So that's all I've got for you today. And I will put the links in the chat. Any questions?
Yeah, Kelly, and your planning team here has been getting links up there as much as they can, but we do have a question from Jason Morehouse with Beck's Hybrids. He asks, does the National Drought Mitigation Center do any research related to how farming and land management practices impact drought?
We do. A lot of that research, we're not necessarily doing agronomic research, but we work closely with farmers and ranchers on a lot of survey research, and we partner certainly in larger projects that are looking at things like that. Okay. And so yes, things like maintaining good soil health are critical for drought mitigation.
Excellent. Does anyone else have any questions? And certainly if you don't want to type it, you can unmute yourself, I think, and you can ask it, because we don't want this to be a death by PowerPoint. We want you to be feeling like you're part of this summit.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment that maybe somebody else can comment on. A lot of times, Kelly, with these tools, the citizen science ones or some other tools, people say, why should I go and put my information in there? What's in it for me? Why is this worth my time? But I know in Indiana, we have a group that actually meets periodically and makes recommendations based on some of the input they're seeing in the Drought Monitor or in the Drought Impact Reporter. And so I don't know how many people are aware of that, or if there's other people throughout the state that should be involved in those conversations. And so I'm aware of them, but I'm not running them or involved. And so I just wanted to put that out there in case anybody who does run that would like to say a few words about it, because I think it's really relevant and connects well to this climate services network idea. And I'll pause there.
Hi, this is Manuela. The team that does get together is looking at a lot of information from Kelly's references that she provided, as well as materials you'll probably hear about from Mr. Mike Ryan and Sam Lashley, as well as David Smith. And our team meets on Monday mornings because our recommendations have to be provided to the National Drought Mitigation Monitoring Center by Tuesday. And so we look at all the historical information. Beth puts out a wonderful survey with the Purdue folks and the extension services, and they also provide ground truthing for us as far as what's going on in their area, as well as the CocoRoss observers throughout the state. And I really want to put a plug in for those folks. If you're not actively involved with the extension service, but are a citizen scientist or would like to be one, please consider CocoRoss observation, because that also gives you an opportunity to provide information about the conditions year-round. And it is used not only for the Drought Monitor, but also for other activities, including snow disaster declarations during the winter. So a lot of good material out there. Thank you for your interest, and thanks for the intro, Melissa.
Now, Manuela, if people are interested in getting more information or being on a list or sending materials, who's the primary contact for that? Is it you, or is it Beth, or who's the best person to reach out to?
They're more than welcome to reach out to myself. I'll put my email address in the chat box, and we'll definitely get them with the right folks. If they're interested in becoming CocoRoss observers, we can get them with their local National Weather Service office and the network of people working on that. So we really appreciate everyone's interest.
All right. So again, folks, if you have other questions, you can put it in the chat. You can private chat with Kelly if you'd like. If you don't like that, everybody sees it. Though, of course, we don't benefit from the answer then. But in the meantime, let's now move over to USDA and state agricultural resources. And we're going to start off with Dennis Toddy telling us a little bit more about the USDA Midwest Climate Hub. Dennis.
Good morning again, and glad to be back with you again. Let's see if we can get this up here. Okay. Yeah, I didn't put a title in here. Well, okay, it's just generic title. It's like, if you're some of my age, you remember the generics of the 70s. It was a black and white, like a can of beer that just said beer. This is a generic title. Okay, we're going to tell you a bit more about the Midwest Climate Hub in kind of a high level detail. Right now, as we're kind of an interesting time of transition, you'll notice that I list the staff as myself, and we have an NRCS liaison, and then the other positions are open. Right now, we're trying to fill one of those positions, so it's not quiet over here. It is we're working with our partners that you're seeing here, and still trying to provide services for agriculture. Just a brief background on the hubs overall. I don't have this on a slide. The hubs are a bit younger than some of the other entities around, because we were formed under the towards the end of the Obama administration under Secretary Vilsack in 2014. So we're only about 7 years old. And the goal then initially was, as Beth mentioned, talking about climate change in agriculture, helping agriculture maintain productivity and functionality all through climate change. Since that time, we've been able to broaden our scope a little bit to deal with all ranges of climate issues. We deal with current drought. We've been helping, I mentioned inversions and drift issues, we've been involved in that, as well as understanding what's happening in the way of climate change and where we're headed. So we deal with, basically if it involves climate and agriculture, it's us right now. We are one of 10 hubs across the country. Our region includes Indiana, covers the area from Minnesota to Missouri over to Michigan and Ohio. We almost exactly overlap with the Midwest Regional Climate Center, except for Kentucky. We lost Kentucky. We traded Kentucky to the southeast for a draft choice or cash considerations, depending on how you want to look at it. But we don't work on hard boundaries. We work with them because they have a number of the same issues that we do. And of those 10 hubs, briefly, 5 are administered under the Forest Service, so they have a little bit of a more forestry angle. 5 are under the Ag Research Service, which is where we sit, are the 10. And then we are in an interesting situation. We haven't talked much about the forestry side of agriculture. Forestry is part of the agricultural system also. If we need to involve or talk about forestry issues, we should include the Northern Forest Hub. We basically split our area with the Northern Forest Hub based out of Houghton, Michigan. Their job is to deal with the forestry side of the house. We take care of the rest of agriculture, is how that breaks down. So if it starts getting into, except for tree fruits, we keep the tree fruits part of it. We work in functionally 3 areas: assessments and syntheses, basically trying to assess information, synthesize information, and deliver that to people to be able to use that. An example of something we're doing with that right now, you heard about the Indiana Climate Change Assessment. We are doing something like that for the other states in our region and working with Indiana to update that, to talk about what climate change means for states what agriculture means for the states in the region, because different states are being affected differently because they have different crops and being affected different ways. We do things with outreach and education. I would consider this an outreach and education part, where we are working with partners to developing new information and how we share that with people. And then doing technical support, working with some of our partners, who you're going to hear from some of our partners along the way here. Again, partners are a big part of what we do. We don't have a staff of 30 that we can cover the whole region. We have a very small staff, so we work with partners, state partners, other USDA, other federal partners, to be able, state extension, land grants, to be able to work and share information regionally. We work on a wide variety of crops. Beth brought that up. There's different parts of agriculture that we deal with. Corn and beans obviously dominate a lot of the landscape, so we don't ignore them. But other specialty crops have different issues and are affected differently by weather and climate and have different decision needs. So we are working to try to help support that throughout the region. My predecessor started some of this, and we've worked with Beth when she was at Mrcc, and worked with various state entities to say, what are some of the needs that we have? I mentioned earlier about the crop calendars for apples, helping understand what the needs are and what the delivery information needs to be with working on a wide variety of crops in our region. So it's a really interesting aspect of this, and we still try to do that despite the wide range of crops and their needs and their backgrounds and those kinds of things. Okay, a little bit quick background on some of the assessments and syntheses. We help deliver information. We do write-ups for peer-reviewed literature for the National Climate Assessment. Doug Cluck will talk about the National Climate Assessment, and for industry-type magazines about how different insects insects and weeds are impacting various crops. Our previous postdoc fellow did a number of work on those kinds of issues. A lot of our effort at this point is working with our partners. One of the focal points we have is working with called the MACT, not to be acronym speak, but we are federal, the Midwest Agriculture and Climate Team, working with Extension primarily, but also some state climatologists and National Weather Service folks in the region. We meet at least monthly during the growing season, if not more frequently, to share information, share tools, share conditions to assess what's going on and to understand what's going on and see if there are any additional needs that we have going along with this. And then some other things that we do a Midwest climate outlook, an ag climate outlook, which we're going to be pulling back up here as we get more staff going on, working with partners on drought, and the webinars and 2-pagers you'll hear more from Doug about in a bit, helping inform some of these things, some of these products along the way related to agriculture. And then technical support on climate change issues, drought workshops, et cetera, going on. Okay, just a couple more things here. Let's go to this last thing. We are in an interesting, I mentioned earlier, here's some more things, some more detailed things we're working on, supporting decision-making, understanding climate change in ag, dealing with extremes, drought, wetness, et cetera. We are at an interesting time period because of the change in administration, that climate and agriculture are a large focus of the Biden administration. So we aren't changing our focus, changing directions on what we're doing, but we are waiting for some more developments from the Biden administration to say, what is going to be supported financially. The president's budget came out last week, and there were some support issues for things related to climate, and not only, and we're talking about here climate adaptation. How do we make crops be productive as it's going on? But also, how do we mitigate climate? How do we sequester carbon in soils? Are there other ways of sequestering or removing greenhouse gases in agriculture? These are all huge, important issues that we're going to continue to deal with as we go along. But we're going to wait to see how the policy works out in dealing with that. So it's an exciting time, a fun time. We look forward to working on that with many of our partners. I have to change this picture because this worked really well when there were 3 of us. Right now, here's some contact information. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Dennis Toddy or the USDA Climate Hubs. Here's our website. And I do want to recognize we have an NRCS liaison, Sean Vickers, who's working with some NRCS issues as we're going along here. Okay, I will pause here, and I think we're just moving on to the next one. Great.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Yeah, if Tony wants to load up his talk. In the meantime, Melissa asked, how does one sign up to join those Mrcc calls? I posted your email address. Hopefully that's okay that they email you and learn more about that. And then Melanie McQuinn from the Shawnee Hills Farm down in Greene County asked, are there any other fruits represented than apples? Which integrated pest phenological models are available for pests and diseases for apples and fruits, other apples? Okay.
Quickly, the Mrcc calls are by invitation only. But if you are at a land grant or extension or closely related, we'll get you added if you are interested. We have kept this as a relatively small, as comprehensive team as possible. And Melanie, we were not, there was a reason why we selected apples for that one issue. We're not exclusive of that. We're trying to do outreach to various other folks as appropriate. I'd be happy to talk with you more about that, and maybe we work with Beth and other folks with extension on how we can do that in the state. Oh yes, the monthly webinar. There is something that everyone can be a part of, and I didn't include the website in here. The monthly webinar included in the first talk, third Thursday of the month, 1 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Anyone can get onto that, hear the presentation. Beth is a presenter on here. Doug's going to include the website where to do that. It's a great opportunity to hear what's going on. You also get a chance to ask questions during that also. You play Stump the Doug and Dennis game or any other presenter. I will stop now. We need to move on.
All right. Thanks, Dennis. Feel free to continue to post stuff in the chat for Dennis. In the meantime, next we're going to hear from Tony Bailey from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. Tony, take it away.
All right, thanks. Able to hear me okay, Beth?
Yes.
And is just my presenter slide on?
Yep. Looks great.
Great. Okay, very good. Thanks a lot. Appreciate the opportunity. Good morning. Give you a quick update from USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service here in Indiana. Just want to touch briefly on a website, conservation programs, and practices that that we work with. So one of the things that we did several months ago is we developed a website. Did not have anything on climate, and so have added this. Wanted to have that there for our staff, for the Indiana Conservation Partnership, for their staff, State Department of Ag, Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and others, potentially for farmers and landowners, and to have one place that we could go to and try and find various information. And you know, trying to coordinate that and put everything in one spot gets me a challenge. I'm sure we've missed something. As we're going through today, tomorrow, I'll be adding things and making some tweaks. If you think of something that you really think ought to be on there, please let us know. We've tried to be inclusive for the different land uses, the different thought processes, and that. But again, I'm sure that we've forgotten something. And we try to stick more with the Indiana Midwest, but at the same time, we've tried to include others as well. Dennis did a nice job of reminding us of forestry. As an agronomist, I'm usually thinking of the crop plan, but we wanted to attempt to include all of those other resources. It's already been mentioned a little bit today about the importance of social sciences. Couldn't agree more. People are probably some of the most important pieces of all this, and how our staff and landowners and farmers interpret these issues or challenges are crucial. You know, we all come at things from a different angles, different perspectives, and yet all these different perspectives impact the implementation or the mitigation plans. And so, you know, whether a person comes at this from a production standpoint, economics, and then I'll throw that last one down there, climate resiliency. We know some are actively thinking about that as a mitigation and trying to address that. We think about these runoff and prolonged rain events and flooding, and not being able to get into fields, and fields not being able to be planted. The various uneven fields, pretty common to see in Indiana, unfortunately, most every year. And we like to think that that healthy soil can help to impact some of these things. We also realize that most of these areas need some sort of tile to actually be effective. But we think by adding some of those things with soil health will help to make that tile work better. But one of the things that we see is runoff and erosion. We see this after extreme weather events, and a lot of this is you know, brought on by ourselves and how we manage that soil. And so a lot of times we've put in, you know, grass waterways, water and sediment control basins to try and address these. And we hope that by including how we manage that soil, those other mitigation factors will help us to address all these different things. Took a quick example of how we might think about this a little bit differently. During a flood event, 2008, Central Indiana. If you're in Indiana at the time, I think you'll remember this. In Columbus, and this is the Hog Creek watershed, so about 56 square miles, about 88% of that is cropland. There was a 5-inch rainfall. We said if, and this is an example, this, you know, back of the napkin example, I'm sure we have a lot more hydrologists on this call than agronomists. I'm sure you can shoot holes in but here's, follow my thought process here. So if we could infiltrate 1¼ inches more of water into the soil, reduce the runoff, if we could store that in the landscape and not send that downstream to Columbus, This is a picture on the left of what the flood looked like at the time, about 19.6 feet deep. That was at 5-inch rainfall. We said with improved infiltration, improved soil organic matter, everything we can to hold water in the landscape, that instead of having water 19.6 feet deep, we would have 15 feet deep. If you look there in the middle, picture in the middle is the hospital in Columbus, which had flooding. Not going to say we wouldn't have flooding in the rest of the city, we would, but would we have had less flooding at the hospital and cause less damage? I think it's very possible. So anyways, just want to think about that's what we think about when we're doing some of these things, these mitigation factors that we would consider and how it has a larger overall impact. So another piece we wanted to add on that website were some of the adaptations and solutions that we could for people to consider, think about. And when we start thinking about those, we already have a lot of different incentives, programs and practices that are available for people to participate in, landowners, farmers, and whether those sources are other state funding, other non-government organizations, but I'll focus a little bit on a couple of these from USDA, particularly the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So that program in Indiana, we get approximately $20 million each year to address a variety of resource concerns. I'll just touch a little bit on the cropland, particularly since I'm providing an agronomic perspective. There are other things that we can do as well. So I want to think about things that we can do to slow erosion and improve soil health. Hopefully, you've already seen some of our demonstrations, our soil health demonstrations. This one has to do with runoff. One of the things that we want to make sure that we do is we infiltrate that water where it lands on the landscape. We want to improve aggregate stability at the surface, reduce surface crusting, reduce compaction. By doing all those things, we think we allow the water to infiltrate and move through the soil profile. It might still come out in a tile, but we'll reduce the amount of runoff. All the water that makes to the tile does not come out in the tile. Some of it is going to bypass the tile and be groundwater recharge, which we know we'll like to have as well. Think about our soil health principles, and one of those primary is to minimize the disturbance. Want to do what we can to reduce that erosion, improve that infiltration, maximize the soil cover, biodiversity, and have those continuous living roots throughout the year. So thinking about those soil health principles, and I would love to spend more time on this topic. It takes a systems approach. Implementing any one of these practices in and of themselves is valuable across the agricultural landscape, but putting them together, we get a synergistic impact and everything works better. So if we're going to implement no-till or cover crops, we need to make sure we're including all of these other practices or management activities as well. One of those practices we pay for is the residue management, no-till, and reduced tillage. Some of those benefits, we know we get reduced fuel use, reduced CO2 emissions, reduced loss of soil organic matter, and of course, reduced evaporation for those times in July and August when we want to save what precipitation we do have in the soil. Also thinking about cover crops. We've done a lot to try and promote cover crops here in Indiana. We want to try and include those when we think they're important across the landscape, whether they're a no-till situation or not, but we want to make sure we have a successful experience with cover crops. In Indiana, out of nearly 1 million acres of cover crops that we have each year, about a quarter of that is paid for through some programs. So we have farmers adopting cover crops at a much higher rate than what we pay for. Lots of success with that. At the same time, we're only at about 9% of the total cropland acres under cover crops. So we still have, unfortunately, still some job security. And final slide, I just wanted to share effects of cover crops related to the drought of 2012, showing the importance of resilience. There on the left is with no cover crops. It's been a no-till, long-term no-till, 80 plus bushels, and then with the cover crops, 160 bushels. And so that healthy soil value, a great increase as far as the profitability on that. So with that, I think that is the end of mine. And I think Trevor might want to get set up and transition to Trevor.
Yeah, and thank you, Tony. While Trevor's getting his presentation up, does anyone have any questions for Tony? Yeah, you can put it in the chat or unmute your mic. I think it's great that we started off the session with that word cloud, and the biggest words were drought and flood, and it seemed like we are, kind of addressing those, that these are things we can do. Any runoff reduction tools we should know about?
Runoff reduction tools. Well, I guess I'm not sure about tools as far as, I think of the mitigations as far as no-till cover crops and that. I'm not sure about if they're meaning other tools. Maybe someone else has a thought on that.
Okay, she posted it in the chat, so if you think of answers or anyone else has any idea, follow up with that. Thanks, Tony. So now we're going to hear from Trevor Loris with the Indiana Department of Ag. Trevor.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can, and I can see your presentation.
Thank you. I'm Mir Tony, and say thank you for the opportunity to come speak with y'all. I've learned a lot just listening to a lot of technical presentations prior to this one, so I won't get quite as detailed as y'all have been, but I do very much appreciate that. My name is Trevor Loris. I work for the Indiana State Department of Agriculture. I head up our division of soil conservation. We're about 30 employees, maybe a little more than 30 employees, most of which are scattered around the state, doing similar work to Tony's agency. In fact, mostly the same. We work directly with partners, producers, landowners to address resource concerns in Indiana. I'll mention that we're a non-regulatory division, again, offering voluntary conservation through technical assistance and cost share. I mention all that because I want to talk a little bit about our Indiana Conservation Partnership we have in Indiana, and any chance I get a forum to do that, I will always shout out all our partners. We do a lot of really great work together, and I feel that by sharing offices, goals, equipment, as well as data, we can achieve a lot more for landowners in Indiana than if we hadn't. So this little screen, my PowerPoint, I threw together pretty quickly, but I just want to include all these. And the main reason I bring this up is being a non-regulatory division, we have the privilege, I would say, of kind of serving as the data clearinghouse for all these conservation divisions. We get data from NRCS, from IDEM, from DNR, and then as well as our own programs, CREP and CWI, as well as local soil and water conservation districts. And we try to consolidate that information and look at statewide results really at a scale that I don't think many other places are capable of doing. To kind of touch back to what Tony said briefly, in terms of the carbon space and greenhouse gases, I think we've been looking to be a piece of this. We believe agriculture is part of the solution for a while. We know farmers have an understanding of regional growing season weather, the Farmer's Almanac, however else. But we also acknowledge, if you look at extreme weather events, 19 of the warmest years on record have been set since 2000. We notice a lot of rain and less events. So just to mirror what Tony had mentioned in terms of runoff and all that, we're looking at this. And as you all know, or maybe you don't, over 80% of Indiana's farms and forests, the vast majority of that being privately owned, it's already a carbon sink. So we believe, through soil health conservation practices like cover cropping, like crop rotations, like reduced tillage, precision ag, or even, in livestock with feeding mixtures or how you source feed. It can continue to be a larger part of the solution and the conversation. So I mentioned we have all this information, all this data, and it's all been really geared around implementation and water quality. I put this up because I thought it's kind of funny. I mean, these are all the different programs, areas laid over each other. I mean, look at this thing. It's kind of a mess. And this, by the way, comes from our 2020 Indiana Conservation Partnership accomplishments, which you can find on our website. If you remind me, I will type that link into the chat at the end, but it's isda.in.gov/division/soil-conservation. So we create all these deliverables centered around, all these different cost share programs and technical assistance programs in the state. And we try, and I know the joke's always on us, if you try to quantify nature and you try to quantify this stuff, it's always really challenging. And I'm sure you're all aware, if you start thinking about carbon, we run kind of same issues. In 2020, we had over 32,000 conservation practices implemented across the state. How we tell the story in terms of carbon continues, like I said, to be a challenge. So far, we've only really, I think, scratched the surface with this little deliverable. You can find that report using a research paper from Agriculture, Ecosystems, and Environment Journal. We took our cost shared cover crop and tried to quantify and did quantify the soil CO2 equivalent. So we're talking soil organic carbon. We calculate a CO2 equivalent coming out to be around 150,000 tons of sequestered carbon in 2020, which with the EPA estimates as around 30,000 cars off the road. I know that a lot of this is geared towards looking at statewide impacts, and we understand that we also need to come up with some tools for just the individual. On a lot of that, we kind of rely on what Dennis had went over and what Tony had went over with some of those NRCS or USDA specific tools at the federal level, and we're looking at those and learning all the time. I also want to say shout out to Mrcc because we use that data a lot. We have a program called CREP, and I'm only bringing this up because it's one of those places where I think we could do a lot more in terms of talking about climate. CREP is a state incentive on top of a federal incentive, and in this program, since 2005, we've restored 5,000 acres of wetlands. We know we've planted 4 million trees throughout the state, a lot of that being kind of floodplain trees. 7,000 acres of filter strips. So we just have all these metrics, and we've thought about it for so long in terms of, I guess I deleted one slide, in terms of, water quality. And I still think that's really important because at the end of the day, we have expert technicians in the field all over the state implementing practices that are good for water quality and wildlife and the climate. So we've been telling one part of the story for a long time, and we've been kind of missing the boat on the climate piece a little bit. As far as, I know you asked to talk about specific tools. I mentioned that paper that we use. We have explored using a denitrification decomposition model from University of New Hampshire, and really a barrier for at least the statewide results is always going to be just barriers with the amount of data that you have or collect. We do collect all this information and want to enrich this data with climate outputs. It's just become, it's part of growing, I guess, as an agency and as a partnership and learning how to do this. And I think, Tony's website puts us on the right trajectory to do that. And if someone comes to me personally and they're asking about, hey, I want to implement no-till on my working lands, I usually point them to that Comet farm, which I don't know if it's been mentioned yet. I'm sure it probably has, but the Comet Planner is kind of a quick heads up resource that I would ship to people maybe from the field that ask. and say, hey, you can go and put in your conservation scenario and it'll give you some outputs. And I like Comet Farm and Comet Planner because you get more than just carbon dioxide, you get nitrous oxide and methane. And I think that's part of the conversation that we also miss out on. We talk about carbon a lot. We don't talk about these other GHGs. The last thing I guess I wanted to mention was I forgot to put my contact information. Sorry, folks. We are working to establish a carbon working group to explore what the state's role might be in a voluntary carbon market. Really, the goal of this meeting be provide some recommendations on how Indiana might navigate or support a voluntary carbon credit market. So right now, to round this whole thing out, we have a tremendous amount of implementation data thanks to our partners and thanks to our field staff. And we just want to find a way to make our reporting a larger part of the climate conversation, and just keep learning and try to be a leader in this space. So thank you all.
Thanks, Trevor. That was great information. If you don't mind, you put in your maybe contact information in the chat.
Yeah, I can do that.
And you had also mentioned some websites. I think Hans put something in there, but you said, that there's some good links. So as you're thinking about it, so folks can check it out. Does anyone have a question for Trevor? I know we're kind of going up against the break, but I'm sure he'll keep an eye on the chat.
Tried to keep it short and sweet for you.
Yeah, just a follow up to Trevor. I mean, that's what Trevor talked about is going to be huge, because assuming that carbon markets are going to be becoming a larger part of what is happening, there's still a big piece of science on the in-between of assessing these that has to play out. But that's going to be worked on, and it's going to move ahead no matter what. So I think starting that conversation now, starting it yesterday, is even better, and trying to figure out how the pieces fit together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the goals of this summit that I mentioned in the beginning is to build collaborations, to build a community, to perhaps have a network. It could be a therapy group if you want for ag, climate, crossovers of how we can get through the challenges and also benefit from opportunities. As Dennis said, we're under a new administration that has really elevated the issue of climate to the top. And so how can we leverage that as a state? Certainly, I want to encourage everyone to tune in all the way to the end of this summit tomorrow, because Melissa will be moderating the final session that will be exploring and trying to hear from all of you. So how can we build a stronger network across the state for climate? So as Trevor's putting his links in and his contact information, Tony, if you wanted to do the same, or any final thoughts before we head into the break? Nope. All right. So we're just slightly behind, but not too far behind. So I invite you all to take a couple minutes, step away from the screen, give your eyes a break, do what you need to. And then if you can please come back promptly, if not slightly before 11:30, because Doug Cluck, for those of you that know Doug Cluck, he's already warned me he's going to go long. So we want to get a jump on this next session. Stay tuned. All right, well, to stay on track, it's 11:30. I'm very excited to now present to you our next two speakers. The first one is Molly Willison, who is the regional coordinator for NIDIS, and I'll let her explain what that is. Molly?
All right. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here today, and thank you, Beth and planning team, for a little bit of time on the agenda. So as Beth mentioned, I am the Drought Information Coordinator with NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information System, and I coordinate the Midwest region. And so just a brief overview of what is NIDIS. NIDIS was first authorized by Congress in 2006 and reauthorized again in 2014 and 2018. And our mandate is to develop and provide a national drought early warning information system. Essentially, our goal is to help the country move from a more reactive state to being more proactive when it comes to drought. Our partnerships include others from federal agencies, state, tribal, and local partners, as well as academia, private sector, and many others across the country. One thing that I did want to point out just in its relationship to agriculture, and I'll show a little bit more information later about this too, is in 2018 in our reauthorization, we were directed by Congress to develop a strategy for a national coordinated soil moisture monitoring network. So what exactly is a drought early warning system? If we look at the definition of early warning, that definition is the provision of timely and effective information that allows an individual to take action when they're exposed to a hazard in order to reduce their risk and prepare for a better response. And so what are those pieces of information that are needed when it comes to drought early warning? And the graphic here on the slide shows those 5 components of information, including observations and monitoring, predictions and forecasting, planning and preparedness, research and applications, and communication and outreach. So even though an early warning system might just sound like the prediction and knowing more in advance that drought is coming, even though that is a very important component of it, that is not the only component. In order to fulfill our mandate for a national drought early warning system, NIDIS has launched 8 regional drought early warning systems, or DEWs, across the country. As you can see, the Western US is completely covered, whereas on the Eastern US over the next few years, we will be expanding to include those states that are not currently included. But thankfully, Indiana is definitely within the Midwest drought early warning system. And one of the unique things about this, about our DEWs and the Midwest DEWs, is that essentially it's a network of partners that are working together to learn from one another and to make climate and drought science accessible and useful for people making decisions on the ground. And that could be the people that are involved in the Midwest DEWs or also the partners that they work with. So just a little bit of a snapshot of what exactly the Midwest DEWs looks like in action. I just wanted to give a few examples of things that are currently going on. And then after that, I'm going to take us to our new drought.gov website for just a very brief demo on a couple of pages related to agriculture. So we do have some observations and monitoring activities going on right now related to drought in the Midwest DEWs. One in particular is that we are working with Beth at the Indiana State Climate Office to develop a flash drought risk tool for the Midwest region. And we also have a lot of efforts for communications and outreach. So with partners across the region, like Dennis at the Hub, Doug at NOAA, and others, the state climatologists, we release communication around drought. We, as needed, release drought status updates. And you can see just a brief snapshot of what that looks like on drought.gov for our most recent Midwest update in early April. Right now, we don't have too many drought issues in the Midwest, so we haven't, we just release information as needed. These drought status updates are released either through email on my Midwest DEWs listserv. So if you're not on that and are interested, I'm happy to add you, and also on drought.gov. We also support research and applications. For example, we are funding a research project right now with Trent Ford, the Illinois state climatologist, and he's looking at the rapid transitions of flood to drought and back again in the Midwest, and looking at the historical implications of those and also the future occurrence of that rapid transition between too wet and too dry. And we also have a lot of work around planning and preparedness, trying to identify drought impacts by state and also the best indicators to look at for drought. So as I mentioned, we host the US Drought Portal, drought.gov, and we just recently redesigned and relaunched a brand new website earlier this year. The new drought.gov has a lot more up-to-date information and a lot of new content related to drought, whether you're looking for current conditions and outlooks, or if you're looking for more information on certain topics like flash drought or ecological drought. The new website also has a lot more interactive maps and data. We also have historical drought information going back to 2,000 years. So I will showcase that here in a second. And so there's a lot of great features that I definitely encourage you to check out on the new website. But I am just going to go there really quick here and show you a few pages. So I'm assuming you guys can see the web browser. I don't know if anyone's, Dennis, you're on camera. Can you see the web browser?
Looks good, Molly.
Okay. So I wanted to showcase the Indiana state page first and foremost. And so on this page, you can get a current snapshot of the US Drought Monitor for Indiana. You can also look by county as well if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper into a county, and I'll show you that page here in just a minute. And you can look at the current conditions last week and last month just to compare how drought has changed, and recently it has gotten better. Down a little bit further, I wanted to show the historical information. Let me just make this a little bit larger here. So you can look at historical drought in the state going back to 2000 for the US Drought Monitor, and that shows the time series here. And you can obviously see the 2012 drought and other periods that have been drier. You also can go back to 1895 using a different data set of the standardized precipitation index. And you can also zoom in here if you wanted to look at, let's say, the late 1920s to mid 1930s. You can zoom into different decades. And then finally, you also can look at paleoclimate data. Again, it's a little bit hard to look right now with all of the years, so you can zoom into different centuries if you're interested in that. And we actually have this historical interface here available for all counties as well. And that's what I wanted to show here, is that you actually can drill down from the Indiana page to either go to a zip code or to a county. I'm going to go to a zip code here really quick. Let's see, I was trying to find one in Indiana that's in drought. So this is what our zip code, our city pages look like. One of the neat features is that you can actually sign up for alerts that if you're interested in knowing when the conditions change for drought in your location. And this right now is based on the US Drought Monitor. However, we will have more indicators that you can sign up for your location in the future. But that comes directly to your email inbox. So whenever your status on the US Drought Monitor changes, you'll get an email. So we have an interesting drought indicators, what's the word? Dashboard, I guess, is a good word for it, where it shows based on different indicators what level of drought you are in this area. So obviously you can see that sometimes they don't always match up, but it does give you an idea of exactly, what's precipitation showing for this county, for this location versus the Palmer Drought Severity Index, and also compared to the US Drought Monitor. And on this page, if you scroll down on all of our local pages, you can get short-term drought indicator blends. You can also get future conditions. So what are the Climate Prediction Center outlooks showing for your area? And again, the historical conditions as well. We do have a couple of agriculture pages. Just quickly, we have one focused on data and maps. So you can get to this by going to the Data and Maps tab up here and browse topics. So that's where the agriculture page is. And as the page suggests, the title, this is where you can find data and maps related to agriculture. So it does give you current agriculture conditions overlaid with the US Drought Monitor, and you can go through different crops or livestock and where they're grown. And then further down, there are a subset of tailored tools just for agriculture that you can dive into. We also have an agriculture page under our by sector tab, and that provides just a little bit more information on exactly how drought does impact that sector. In this case, agriculture. But as you could see, we have many different sectors like water utilities and other emergency planning, for instance. So a lot of information to dive into. Again, it gives you that snapshot of drought, but it goes more into what are the key issues of drought in agriculture? What are the impacts? and also a lot of resources. If you're looking for information on observation and monitoring for agriculture and drought, planning, predictions and forecasting, and other related content as well. We do have a soil moisture page. I know my time is up, but just wanted to briefly show that. And this gives a little bit more information about tools that are available for soil moisture. And also, if you scroll down further, if you're interested in learning more about the National Coordinated Soil Moisture Monitoring Network, which is the effort that NIDIS co-leads with USDA and other agencies, there is more information here as well. So I will go ahead and stop there, and I'm happy to take questions whenever there is time or in the chat box.
Thanks, Molly. It looks like Melanie does have a question, so I'll read it out loud, but maybe if you can respond in the chat, but just so everyone's aware, any resources available for mitigating pests and diseases for fruit crops based on growing degree day and other phenological indicators?
Okay, I might have to have Dennis answer that one, but we'll address it in the chat box.
Okay.
That's a follow-up from the chat. No.
Okay.
Molly, you've been assigned a new specialty, Molly.
Yeah, I was going to say, not my area, but I'll try.
All right. So again, I want to keep things moving to respect people's time, but we certainly do want to hear from everyone. But in the meantime, if Doug can upload the presentation and start to talk, that would be great. Doug Clark, he and I have worked together for a long time. He's been with the National Weather Service and is now the Central Regional Climate Services Director. Take it away, Doug.
All right.
I can hear you.
Number one, do you see the full screen?
I see the presentation screen. I see what I think I should be seeing.
Yes.
It looks
You're saying
good.
what you should be. Okay, great. My name is Doug Cluck. I'm the Regional Climate Services Director. I sit in Kansas City, Missouri. I work for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and very specifically the National Centers for Environmental Information. I'm going to talk about some of, I guess you'd call the services that we provide. We being all these people down at the bottom of this, as Dennis said earlier about having a staff and having people to direct around and all that. I don't have that, at least at the moment. So a lot of this is done via partnership with, let me say, the regional climate centers, of course, NIDIS, USDA, National Drought Mitigation Center, and of course, the state climatologists. And so Beth, you click how many boxes on there? A bunch of them. So Beth is everything, by the way. You're very lucky to have Beth in Indiana. So the overview. So I'm going to first define what climate services mean, at least to me and a number of other folks, but it's really the development and delivery of climate information and services that are on a time and spatial scale needed most by decision makers. And that, of course, is something we're always trying to understand better, right? So one of the reasons we're even having this conversation today is to hear from you, as Beth said earlier, about your needs and all those things. So what we do know is that there are a number of regional services that we provide that seem to be fairly popular. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're sure people don't know that does exist that need more, publication, if you will. In other words, people need to know that they exist. So I'm going to cover all these topics here underneath here sort of quickly. One of the sort of overall overviews of all the services that we provide in this region. Now, this region includes Indiana, but really stretches from the Great Lakes, Ohio, all the way west to the Rocky Mountains, so the north central part of the U.S. We talked about this webinar thing, excuse me, this public webinar thing a little earlier. It is a regional webinar. It's not focused necessarily on any particular state. It can be if there are major issues and events going on in that particular state. But generally, we're covering past, present, and future. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. We have climate briefs that we put out. They're short little 1 or 2 page documents. We do a quarterly climate summary. So 4 of those a year, based on the season, more or less, kind of gives you a taste of what happened, and a taste of some of the impacts from those events, and a little bit of a view into the future. Sometimes we'll put out a brief on an extreme event, and I'll talk about all these things, I guess, a little bit later here. So this is just a graphic showing what we've done over the last 10 years in terms of the webinars. It's been fairly successful. More and more people are coming to these. We have a lot of federal, state, tribal folks, some academics, business, and industry do tune in, including individual farmers, for that matter, of all sorts. Organic and specialty crops, as well as row crop folks. And of course, where we talk about climate and weather, so do the commodities people want to know what's going on as well. So there's a lot of, I guess you could say, insurance and investment types that tune into these. So there's more of a taste of what they are. These webinars, again, past, present, future is what we talk about. And I call these near-term climate services. We're not looking out 2 or 3 years into the future. Really, we can't very well. But we're also not talking at the climate change level either. We're not talking at 10, 20, 50 years either. We're talking about what's going on right now. And we're talking about what may happen in the next 2 to 6 months into the future as best we can gather with all the information that we have. A lot of this is translating information that other parts of NOAA and our partners put out there. And it's really combining it all into one sort of cohesive story, if you will, each month. And the state, more or less, the state climatologists are the ones who do the briefings. You can see Aaron Wilson from Ohio on the right, and Pat Gannon from Missouri on the left did a couple presentations recently. Yeah. And then these briefings that we put out look a little bit like this. There's one from the Midwest. They're pretty short and fairly non-technical. They talk about big events that have happened over the last 3 months. We also do event-based ones like this. This is actually one that we did with NIDIS, and NIDIS does these too. We work with NIDIS to get these event-based drought versions out, briefings out when needed. And then finally, we'll do things like based on La Nina or El Nino if it's coming in the fall. Well, that's usually when we put these out. Just to give you a flavor of what that means. What does it mean for the Midwest that La Nina is happening, generally speaking? Or what does El Nino mean for that matter? Next. So here's an example of an extreme brief. This is the 2019 historic year of flooding, mostly to the west of Indiana, but Indiana had their fair share as well. So occasionally we'll do these short fuse extreme event, short fuse being 2 to 4 weeks in advance. This is pretty rare that we have a good handle on an extreme event even 2 weeks out. You know, sometimes it takes up until the day before, or maybe Sam and others on the Weather Service can talk more about that. But it's tough to call an extreme event, 2 weeks in advance. But when we see conditions lining up that could be especially dangerous or impactful, you can see some of the things that we're putting down here: to harvest, late freezes, major snowfalls on the cattle industry or livestock or whatever. Combined with fire or whatever, we'll try to get some information out as early as we can. Whoop! I'm getting an alert on my phone. I'm going to shut that sucker off. All right. So here's an example of one that we did back in 2017. The Weather Service did this great slide, put out these great slides in terms of what's going to happen in terms of cold and snow. This is a late snow, and there's a lot of livestock in the way, as well as other issues. This is what the USDA contributed, kind of telling everyone what the impacts could be. So this is where we team up with Dennis and his shop and others to bring the impacts. We'll talk about the weather and climate, and he and others will talk about what's going to happen in terms of, in this case, agriculture. Shifting gears slightly to who I work for, more specifically, the National Center for Environmental Information. So they're the storehouse for all kinds of climate and weather data. That's where you go besides the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. This is the storehouse, not only for the nation, but for the world in terms of where to look for climate information. And you can see all the people that they serve based upon all these different needs locally, regionally, nationally, globally, monthly, annual, seasonal, all this stuff. I'm gonna give you a taste of what that's like here. So monitoring the climate, here's a map of the world in terms of temperature. Just this year, the first 4 months of this year, where it's pink is where it's warmer than normal, where it's blue, it's cooler than normal. This is a La Nina year. So you'll see the Pacific, at least the Eastern Pacific, is cooler than normal. That's typical for a La Nina year. Let's see. And then over on the left, you can see the rankings of the warmest years. That's both land and sea on record. Okay, I don't know if you noticed here, but a lot of these years are pretty recent. Those are the warmest years on record. So we're not making this stuff up. So this is 2020. This is the year 2020. Also showing where conditions were warmer and cooler than normal for the entire year of 2020 on a global perspective. Just to give you a taste of some of the global information that we do. We also do, focusing it more down to the US, we also do rankings of how warm and cold and wet and dry it's been by state. This is April of 2021. So we have temperature on the left, average temperatures. Indiana was pretty average. If you average it over the month of April, pretty much in the middle, and a little bit on the dry side. If you look at the precipitation on the right, ranking 37, and the browns and tans indicate drier. The greens indicate wetter, if you will, for those precipitation numbers. And those numbers those numbers are the rankings of how dry. It was the 37th driest year on record out of 127 years in Indiana. And yeah, so that's the ranking. So we can focus a little bit more down on the county level, just showing you that there is county level data out there, if that matters to you, for both precipitation and temperature. On the left, I put minimum temperatures. So if you're interested in minimum temperatures for whatever reason, you can find those, or maximum temperatures, if that matters to you more. Sometimes that does matter in terms of agriculture. Now, we can burrow all the way down to county level. This is I had to look for a map of Indiana with a color on it, meaning in this case warmer than normal conditions. So I went back to last July, and where you see well, it's all warmer than normal, and to different degrees. They're 1 to 3 to 5 degrees warmer than normal last July. Now I don't remember that, but maybe you guys do. I also went back to find one of your more extreme wet years, and here's 2019. I believe this was a 3-month period. How come I can't figure that out? 3-month period. It's not May, June, July. It's April, May, and June of 2019 in this case. So super wet down there on the Ohio River. And yeah. So anyway, we have county level information like that. And then finally, in terms of local monitoring information, we can look at places like South Bend. There's like 4 or 5 major cities that we have graphics like this for. And I think the Weather Service has more than this. But anyway, this is what we have graphics for. And it shows you, in this case, this shows you precipitation for South Bend, Indiana, from the beginning of their records. And you can see there are some broken records in there, but they're missing data, I should say, in some places. But you can also see a blue trend line in there too. And I think that's probably most important. If people are thinking it's getting wetter, they're right. There's an average of about a little more than half an inch wetter per decade for South Bend. I didn't look at other places around, but South Bend definitely has a wetting trend, if you will. Same with temperature. Again, looking at South Bend, I picked on South Bend. I don't know why, I just found them easily, I guess. Anyway, here's the temperature change for the period of record too. You can see the individual years in there, and you also see that red line sort of indicating the direction of warmth, if you will. So heating up in South Bend. And then I think finally, in terms of monitoring locally, we also keep track of how wet it has been compared to other years. So if you look very closely at this graphic, you'll see that the 2021 year is its blue color, and it's below the black line. The black line is average. So again, St. Joseph County, I'm assuming that's South Bend, I'm not sure. But anyway, St. Joseph County is drier than normal. And you can see some of the driest years and some of the wettest years also put on this graphic. So we're trending toward the drier side, definitely, in that particular county. But you can look at this stuff, through time, and it may be helpful to you. Other climate data for ag use out of National Centers for Environmental Information are using monthly and annual precipitation to understand the impact of El Nino and La Nina on crop yields, using meteorological data for entomology studies. They've used that data for those things, and daily climate records for growing degree days and all those other things that Dennis has talked about. All comes from, or a lot of the data comes from NCEI. Briefly, we also keep track of billion-dollar disasters. If you don't make the cut at $1 billion, sorry, you don't get on this graphic. But here's the 2020 billion-dollar disasters for the nation. Okay, all kinds of weather and climate. Obviously, lots of hurricanes, lots of fires, some severe weather, some drought issues. Here's Indiana's chart, if you will, in terms of billion-dollar disasters since 1980. And it looks dominated by severe storms. If you look at the billion-dollar disasters that have happened in Indiana, by far the green, all those little green bars there, the bars indicate severe storms that cause major damage. There's other things in there too, like flooding, what am I saying? Winter storms, drought, that kind of stuff. Anyway, you can find all this information on our website. Each one of those things, almost every one of those things, there's so much more information that we could be talking about. And again, we could spend time doing this at a different venue. Briefly, the U.S. produces national climate assessments. This is the last one that was issued. And here are the table of contents. There's a new one going to be coming out in 2022-23. There's the Midwest section of that, which would have Indiana focus on it. There's also these ones I've highlighted in red that may be of interest. These are the chapters from the past, and they'll be pretty much the same for the future national climate assessments. All of this is online. All of this is usable. All the graphics. Everything is downloadable. I have a few of the books. If anybody ever wants one, they can send me an email and I'll try to get you one. All the red chapters there are ones that may be sort of pertinent for this particular webinar, I should say. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug.
Hope that's everything.
We're still here.
Yeah. You haven't fallen asleep, have you?
Anyone have any questions for Doug or Molly? So if we can, let's see, get David Lampy to load up his talk while that gives a few moments for folks to ask Doug or Molly any questions. We're going to be moving into water supply and monitoring as our last session.
Are you seeing my screen?
I am. It looks like it's in edit mode though. And now it's in presentation mode. Looks good and I can hear you.
Perfect. All right, yeah, my name is Dave Lampy. I'm with the USGS Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Water Science Center. And I was just going to go through some of the data and tools available that we have from our Science Center. I know probably a lot of you are familiar with a lot of these things, but I'll go through them here. So just a little bit about what I'll be talking about. The USGS Oki Water Science Center collects data in different hydrologic networks, surface water, groundwater, and water quality. I'll be talking mostly about surface water and groundwater at this point. I wanted to go through some national tools that we have that some are relatively new and people might not be aware of. One's the National Water Dashboard. We also have Water Watch and Groundwater Watch. So these are both bullets are tools that we have on a national level to kind of synthesize and view the data that is collected within Indiana and also, all the states in the U.S. I was also going to show an example of a Kentucky Drought Monitor that we put together for the state of Kentucky within our Water Science Center. Some of you might have seen that in other presentations, but I'll show that here briefly. Some of these things at the bottom here are kind of if I have time, if time allows, and I don't know if it will exactly, but I'll at least mention them. USGS has an integrated water availability assessment project that's starting in the state of Indiana probably next year. And that was identified in the Illinois basin. And I can talk a little bit about that and point you to a website with more information. And then we also have a project going through the state of Ohio and Northeast Indiana looking at a water availability assessment. This is mostly like a groundwater availability assessment. And if time allows, I can go through that a little bit. So just a little bit about the different networks that we collect data within the state. We have, everyone's probably familiar with the stage and stream flow networks, the lake and reservoir levels and groundwater levels. We also have some sites with precipitation data. We do some water temperature at specific sites as well. They're kind of lumped into the water quality sites on this map and on our website, which everyone can get to, by the way, at in.water.usgs.gov. We also do some sediment network, sediment data collection. We collect water quality nutrients and then also, other water quality parameters. Phosphorus is one that's coming up a lot. On the non-continuous side, we've been doing PFAS data collection, a lot of other things as well. So if you can name it, we've probably dabbled in it at some point. So just going straight to the National Water Dashboard, this is a new interface that the USGS has developed to kind of bring in all the different data types that we collect within the state and the surrounding areas where you can kind of see it all in one place. I'm not going to go to the actual website and do a demo just because of time, but I believe they're going to put this link that I've got on the slide here so people can go to it and play around with it. But basically on the right side of the slide, you'll see this little dashboard here where you can turn things on and off within the state. So we can turn on stream flow data, and there's a drop down here where you can color code based on different statuses for the sites. So like right now, I think it's color coded for flow status. So the red ones don't have the legend. So I'm assuming that's probably low flow and the blue and greens are high flow. You can also do other other parameters based on that data for those stream sites as well. You can also bring in the lake stations, so lake levels, the groundwater wells. We also have water quality data that you can put on in color code. The precip stations that we have across the state, you can turn those on and off. Atmospheric would be other weather stations where we have, temperature or humidity, wind speed, that sort of thing. You can turn those on and off. It's got a space for tidal. That's, not really applicable to Indiana. We don't have any tidal data for Lake Michigan. So that's not applicable there. But if you were interested in looking at, the data associated with hurricanes or tropical storms coming into the coast, you could look at that along the coastline as well. So once you have these all turned on, you can click on an individual site and it'll bring up hydrographs for that site. It'll have links to the other data that's associated with the site. So you can go to INWIS, which is our National Water Information System portal to download data. you can get updated hydrographs. And USGS is also in the process of updating the NWIS portal. So a lot of you are probably used to the old format where you can't really interact with it. You kind of have to type things in and hit go and get new hydrographs. But they're in the process of updating that. And so there's a link on there called the Next Generation system. And that'll have more interactive website where you can actually put your cursor along the line and see values based on that, drag to extend the period and manipulate that. And then there's also links to other products, like if we had flood inundation maps associated with the site, you can overlay that stuff or get to it too from that. There's also, go back a slide. So if you click on the weather conditions or the hydrology links down here, you can add other data layers to the map as well. So this is one I put together yesterday that's got the drought conditions from, I believe, NITIS, posted on kind of overlaid on the dashboard with the groundwater well data indicating red would be below normal, and then the lighter colors would be above normal. So you can see there's a lot of below normal through here. If you hover over one of the wells, it'll pop up with some data for that individual well. You can also overlay weather. So like this is radar from yesterday with that storm coming through Cape Girardeau. You can turn on a loop with the radar. There's a lot of other things that you can turn on there too. There's aquifers that you can turn on and off, and you can also bring in the rivers where as you zoom in, they kind of fill in and turn off. So it's a pretty, honestly, yesterday was the first time I really messed with it too much. It's a relatively new system and it's really powerful, and you can see outside of the state also, which is pretty useful. Some other website that maybe more people are familiar with is USGS Water Watch. So Water Watch is mostly hosts the surface water data and some interpretations based on that data. And so I've just got a couple of snippets of some tools that are available from Water Watch. You can do things like get flow duration hydrographs, which are shown down here on the lower right for our individual sites. You can compare recent real-time data to period of record data for individual sites. And you can also make these GIF illustrations, which are kind of nice for presentations like this. You can download these and you can kind of see the nationwide stream flow network, how it changes from day to day based on the data that's coming in real time. You can make these measurements, you can make these visualizations for the entire US, or you can also do individual state ones as well. Hopefully that video showed up. The next one was the USGS Groundwater Watch. So this is similar to Water Watch, which was on the last slide, but Groundwater Watch obviously just illustrates groundwater data that we've been collecting. And so this is just a snippet of the Indiana Active Water Level Network. So this is basically any well within the state where we're collecting some sort of water level data, whether it be for a project that might last 2 or 3 years, or a network that we've been monitoring for 20 to 30 years. You can access all that data through this portal. I will say they're in the process of updating this website, so it's a little finicky right now, but it does work for the most part. The different shapes are indicated of what type of data is collected at that site, and the colors, like the other slide, identifies the condition of the site at that time. This is just a little bit more information. So if you clicked on one of those wells in Groundwater Watch, it gives you a comparison of the data that we're collecting right now to a statistical representation of the period of record for that site. So obviously, if you have a well that has a lot more data, you're going to get a lot more bang for the buck out of these graphs than if there was a well that was just had started collecting data today or this year. I believe you have to have at least 10 years of data for this kind of statistical representation to kick in so it can compare to itself. But it is a pretty useful tool, I think, and it's something that in the next generation of the Groundwater Watch, we're hoping that they're going to keep that around. And you can also look at the comparison of the current data, which is the kind of the dark line here, with the period of record for those days. So you can see how it compares to the mean, which is in green, and this shaded area, which is the high and low on an annual basis for the period of record. Just real quick too, I'll go through a little bit about this Kentucky Drought Condition Monitor that we developed as a joint project with the Kentucky Agricultural Development Board. And so we're using data from different sources. We're using precipitation from the National Weather Service, stream flow from the USGS, and groundwater from the USGS. And then we're also utilizing crop moisture index from the National Weather Service, Central Region Climate Prediction Center. Just a screenshot of this, and I believe there's going to be a link shot out to this as well, so you can kind of look at that. This was developed showing individual conditions for each county within Kentucky. So you can see these little green dots in the middle of all the counties down here. Those are representation of these 4 quadrant data types for each county. So we've got precipitation in the upper left, stream flow percentile in the upper right, groundwater level percentile in the lower right, and then the crop moisture index is in the lower left. And so if you click on one of these individual counties, and you can zoom in also and take a look, you'll get a kind of a zoom in, you'll get a representation of the conditions within that county. And it'll also show some hydrographs and some other things based on which box you click in here. And there's also a description about how we set this up and what data it's utilizing to come up with these color codes for each county. Basically, it's utilizing the closest stream flow site that we deemed is viable for this kind of tool. If there's a groundwater well within the county also, we're utilizing that. Kentucky, we don't have very many groundwater wells down there, so you'll see a lot of those boxes are grayed out. And then it has a description of the precipitation and the crop moisture index as well. And so if anyone's interested in that, we'll send off a link as well. And also Tom Ruby and Pete Chenote out of our center is kind of the contacts for that if you have more questions. So these are these links that that should be shared within the chat, and I can send those along too if anyone wants to reach out and contact me or has more questions. Real quick, I'll just mention the AWAS project, and then we can move on to someone else. I don't want to take up too much time here, but something that has come up here within the last year is this integrated water availability assessment study that that there will be a link in the chat again, kind of illustrating what else we're doing as part of this. But the Illinois Basin was selected out of a kind of a contest throughout the entire nation as a basin to do some more advanced data collection and interpretation over the next several years. It's going to start next year. We're kind of gearing up with equipment and that now, and identifying places where we have data gaps within the basin that we can fill. And so we're looking at evaluating supply and demand factors within the basin, looking at long-term trends in water availability and the causes, so on and so forth through this. I would say if you have more questions, Jeff Fry from our office is probably the most familiar with the scope, but you're going to see a lot more about this coming up, probably starting next year when we start gearing up with this. There'll be a lot more information out with this. I think that's all I really wanted to talk about at this point. If anyone has any questions, I can answer those, or we can move on to the next person.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and Melissa's been putting the links to all those different sites in the chat for folks to copy and paste. And I think way back in the chat, somebody asked about, are the presentations going to be made available? And we do hope to have a website up, and so links could be in there. Tony has posted something in the chat, so I'll let folks look at that and respond. In the meantime, just for the sake of time, we'll have our last speaker, David Smith, talk about other water monitoring resources. David? It looks like the one I'm seeing now is like the two-slided one, where I can see both the next slide and the main slide. Yep.
There you go.
We go. Now we can see it.
Sorry about that.
Hi, Dave.
So thank you all. I'm going to really cover just two and then primarily sources from DNR water resources. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some interagency coordination. And so part of our effort at DNR Division of Water and overall in DNR is to create a water awareness comprehensive program. And so part of that program involves putting together diverse responsibilities. And there's two main ones: evaluating the state of Indiana's water resources, and then regulating the development within water resource projects to protect, enhance, and continue the use of our waterways and lakes. And the ag community and other communities are our primary customers. And I'm going to show you two map applications that are available. These are online. These are both significant water withdrawal facilities and well data. This is the northeast corner of Indiana, particularly Steuben County and LaGrange, and heading into Noble County and those areas. The different color codes represent different water use withdrawals. And so the predominant in this area is irrigation for a variety of uses, but primarily for agriculture. You can see there's a good number of public water supply withdrawals. And this would be primarily from our aquifers and groundwater. And you can see also that the red coded ones are industry. So what we're able to do from the map applications is to overlay precipitation or some sort of regional assessment in terms of risk, like the Drought Risk Atlas and some other products, and able to look at over time the impact from either too wet or too dry in those particular areas. And I have links on each of these slides where you can go to directly to the map applications. Our second major data source that we receive at the division is our well record data. This goes back, as well as the water withdrawals, several decades. And so we have a long time series and history of the change in terms of the number of wells, both residential and commercial in this area, and also overlay the significant water use. And so based on this information and this core data, we can pretty much comprehensively view the state of Indiana's water resources. And so if you're an ag producer in an area and you want to know what other irrigation sites are close, you can have the proximity information, what their withdrawal rates are. A lot of that can help with the technical aspects of designing and installing irrigation systems. And overall, this is a total partnership. So when you look at Indiana waterways with the Department of Environmental Management and our flood information portal with FEMA and Department of Homeland Security, and then our water shortage plan is what's driving our involvement, not only in the Indiana Drought Advisory Task Force Group, but also as we look at, as Dave Lampe showed earlier, as we bring different templates to Indiana, primarily our water shortage plan is organized around a 1 month or 30-day standardized precipitation index, the conditions that are and the different categories of the U.S. Drought Monitor, and then stream flow as a percentage of normal, mainly through the percentiles. And in Indiana, both water excess and water shortage pretty much can create the state of water resources in Indiana. So for example, if we were going to look at some current information, one of the things that the division has done over the years is identifying monitoring sites, both stream flow, groundwater, and key watersheds and basins at various levels. So this is an example of in North Central, Division 2 in the climatic division. It's separated by counties. So we have both county data and larger regional data and watershed data as well. Over time, we're able to assess different conditions. And I showed Fulton 7 because it's been very adversely impacted by the plethora of irrigation systems. You can see that the bottom red line, the observed data since 2016 through current, is shown on the darker blue. The lighter blue is the average over the period of record, but the bottom red line shows the lowest depth of water that has been observed in that well. And you can see with the increasing irrigation, not only frequency, but the number of irrigators, that we've had 4 different stair steps of lowering the overall minimum water level, the lowest observed water level in these wells. And we can not only look and assess the data, but we can also make interpretive and forecasted impacts for the particular areas. We also have the stream flow that we've selected by climate division. This is an example of the Eel River at North Manchester. This is one of our best examples because due to the removal of low-head dams on the river, the river reach is fairly in its most natural state and not real controlled. And so I show you that as an example. And the data and information that we process, we put it into graphical form. This is a comparison between the normal flow and the actual flow at that location from January of through 2020 through the end of April. And this is plotted on a monthly basis. You can see the divergence we had with our latest longer term hydrologic drought kind of low period in Indiana, after seeing several high periods of good spring and winter rainfall going into the lower season, on how those potential impacts and stream flow would be manifest in those areas. And so we have these overall both stream flow and groundwater sites. All that information is interpreted for special analyses. And so we coordinate with different agencies throughout the state and at the federal level. And as Dave Lampy showed, that the National Water Dashboard and the National Water Model from NOAA are primary examples of what we use in the state level to assess and to create awareness of the state of water resources. This is just last week's analysis that shows the soil moisture conditions with some soil moisture analytics. That is a combination of satellite derived information as well as the stream flow. The stream flow map is the low flow that's available from the National Water Dashboard, and the well information that's in process of being revised, and also the National Drought Monitor for Indiana. In addition, our staff, whether it's biologists and geologists and hydrologists and so forth, interface with various cooperators. Here's an example with the Purdue Agronomy Department on creating an evapotranspiration climatology for Indiana. This is just one of the figures showing the variability of winter, spring, summer, and fall on the net, meaning the distribution of rainfall minus ET. And so the bluer would be where precipitation is keeping ahead and exceeding the ET values. And obviously during the summer, which is our warmest season, where the evapotranspiration has exceeded the average normal rainfall. So with all these different products, we're able to not only provide a snapshot, but also weekly, monthly, and different timescales information to on not only water use but water availability through the state. If there's any questions, I have contact information, and we'll see what's in the chat box, and you can contact me at that information as well. And all this information is available through the DNR web page, which is there on the slide.
All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
So we've had a pretty full morning, and we're nearing the end of day one of the Climate Summit. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I see that we're going to hit 12:30 pretty darn soon. So I want to do some closing remarks for today. Remember that tomorrow we're going to have a few more presentations from the National Weather Service, and then presentations about how we are monitoring more across the state and how even you can help us monitor climate conditions across the state. But then after one of the breaks, we're going to start to hear from actual producers across the state who are participating in this. And hopefully many more of you are also either hobby producers or you are with a family with a small farm. And so if we think back to that last Mentimeter that we did, I'll see if I can show that really quickly, where I asked, what are the two greatest climate threats to agriculture? And it looked like from the end, how we finished with 32 participants, drought and flood came up, but we still had other issues like like heat, freezing, variability. I'm going to ask that your homework tonight, because it is sort of a workshop, is to think about the climate threats to agriculture. Again, this could be specialty crops, row crops, livestock. How could the climate data be improved? How are you currently using climate and weather data for agricultural production? Are there new tools or new data that maybe you learned today or you learn early tomorrow that you think you'll start using a little bit more to help make better decisions, to help plan seasons out? If you had better information, if you had access to better climate, weather information, whether we presented it today or not, how might that affect your production? We really would like to hear in that session, boy, if I had this 3-week forecast that told me it was going to be a heat wave, then I would totally be able to do X, Y, and Z. We're kind of interested in knowing what responses would become of improved climate services. And then where are there gaps in climate services that, yes, maybe not everything's out there, but if we were to try and make a priority list, what would there be? Not just in terms of data and tools, but in human resources. Do you feel like you know who to reach out to? Do you feel like this summit has been useful for you, that next time you have a question about something with agriculture and climate, you know who to ask? And then if you could envision a climate network coming out of this summit for Indiana, a network where people can just pick up the phone or shoot an email or say, hey, we really need to get the state or feds or somebody to help prioritize developing this. As you probably saw, Melanie was asking, we need more pest and disease tools in this state. Why is it that all the surrounding states have these tools and we don't? Well, if we have a collective across the state of climate service providers and climate service users, and there's a consensus of, yes, we need this, then that network can have a lot of power. So think of those 3 or 4 questions that I just brought up. Think about these topics that I'm sharing on the screen of these are the biggest climate threats to agriculture across the state, so that in the last half of tomorrow's second final day summit, we can have a really good, rich discussion that can come off with some action items of where do we go from here. We don't want this to be a one and done. This is just the beginning of the conversation. And the fact that you all have graciously devoted your time, your morning to listen in on this means that you have interest in this. And we want you to be part of the decision making going forward. So with that, I'm going to wish you a good rest of the day, a good evening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us on the planning team, drop us an email. All those emails I've been sending you, I think, has all of our contact information, and we really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.